Tonight, we explore a darker twist in the Harry Potter story. Not a boy with a scar, but a boy with a serpent burned into his arm. Tonight we explore the Death Eater who betrayed Voldemort and died so quietly the world forgot his name. The grave was empty in more ways than one. Regulus Black has a date on a family tapestry, a name on a ministry record, and a whisper in Grimmauld Place. But no body anyone ever mourned, no grave anyone ever stood beside with flowers or truth. This is important, because in the hollow where his memory should be, something else has been buried. The possibility that the first true crack in Voldemort's immortality came not from Dumbledore's wand or Harry's courage, but from a frightened, resolute black heir walking alone into an underground lake. What if the most important betrayal of Voldemort happened years before Harry's story began? Not by Dumbledore, who had mapped the edges of this dark magic but never reached its heart. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins of Godric's Hollow. Not Sirius, who had broken from his family and run toward the light as if he could outrun his own blood. What if it was the other son, the obedient one, the boy who stayed? A teenage Death Eater, marked and sworn, who looked at the Dark Lord and decided to turn. Canon leaves us with fragments. R.A.B. scratched on a note inside a heavy locket, a burned name on the Black family tree, a bitter sentence from Sirius about a younger brother who got in too deep and tried to back out. In the official story, Regulus is a footnote, a failed fanatic swallowed by the war. Yet that locket, that single stolen Horcrux, becomes one of the most important objects Harry will ever hold. One decision in a drowned cave pulls at the ending of the war like a hidden thread. This is not a redemption fairy tale. There is no sudden, shining conversion, no public confession in the Great Hall. This is a slow, suffocating tragedy about loyalty and indoctrination, about a child raised in the House of Black nursery to worship pure blood names the way others whisper prayers. It is the story of a boy who walked into the dark on purpose, knowing it would kill him, and who did it anyway because something in him refused to let Kreacher's suffering. And the horror of a torn soul stand unanswered. In this episode, we will trace Regulus from cradle to cave, from the green and silver banners of his Slytherin dormitory to the moment he presses a false locket, a mere replica, against his chest and finalizes his plan. We will reframe familiar scenes, the screaming portrait in Grimmauld Place, the Order's search for Horcruxes, Harry's own journey to that same Black Lake, through the unseen influence of the brother Sirius, never truly understood. And at the end, we will ask a difficult question. When weighed in the same scales as Snape's lifelong penance or Lily's sacrificial charm, what is the worth of Regulus Black's silent, unmarked death? The House of Black did not raise children. It forged them. Number 12. Grimmauld Place was not a home in the ordinary sense, it was a mausoleum that happened to be alive. The walls were swathed in dark velvet that muffled every sound, the air heavy with old magic and older dust. Ancestral portraits watched from their gilt frames with the stillness of predators at rest, eyes following every movement, judging every hesitation. Over all of it, like a carved epitaph over an invisible grave, the family motto whispered from silver and stone, toujours pur. This is important, because for a quiet, observant boy like Regulus Black, that motto was not merely a phrase, it was a commandment. He learned to walk softly over creaking floorboards, to listen when adults spoke of bloodlines and betrayals, to understand that the greatest sin in this house was not cruelty, but contamination. At night, When the curtains were drawn and the gas lamps dimmed, his world narrowed to the low murmur of his parents' voices and the rustle of the tapestry that mapped his fate before he could read it. Sirius tried to break the pattern. Sirius shouted. Sirius slammed doors so hard dust fell from the ceiling and the ancestral portraits woke and shrieked. He called their beliefs madness, called their Dark Lord a monster long before the name Voldemort was spoken in that dining room. He refused the plan that had been written for him. Regulus watched. He watched the way his mother's face twisted, the way his father's voice went cold, the way love in this house snapped like a charm withdrawn. Not Dumbledore, who had preached tolerance in assembly halls, not Hagrid, who had told stories of Hogwarts as a refuge, ever saw that first fracture. But Regulus did. Where Sirius rebelled, Regulus complied. He sat straight backed at the table while his father told stories of noble ancestors who had kept the bloodline pure, of cousins who had disgraced themselves by marrying Muggle-borns, of names scorched from the tapestry like bodies erased from a battlefield. He listened as his mother spoke of blood traitors with a softness that made the hatred worse, as if pitying the foolish dead who had chosen wrongly. Each tale was a bedtime story and a warning, a careful layering of pride and fear until he knew, with the certainty of a child desperate to be chosen, that he was the son who understood his duty. The emotional gravity of that choice cannot be overstated. By the time Sirius ran away and was, in effect, already burned from the family's living memory, Regulus had become the perfect son almost by necessity. The heir who stayed. The boy who received the looks of approval at breakfast, the rare, brittle praise at dinner, the hand on his shoulder when guests praised his manners and his promise. Is it any wonder that when Voldemort's rhetoric reached Grimmauld Place, it felt less like a seduction and more like an inheritance? The Dark Lord spoke of cleansing, of destiny, of pure bloods reclaiming their rightful place. To Regulus, it sounded like his parents' voices, only amplified and made grand. The grave was empty where unconditional love should have been. In its place stood expectation, polished and gleaming like the silver serpent on the Black family crest. When the mark burned on other arms, it promised power. On Regulus, it promised belonging. Often, late at night, he would stand before the great tapestry in the hall, the woven story of his house stretching back centuries. His fingers would trace the curling branches, the embroidered names, the delicate green threads that tied one generation to the next. They would pause, always, over the scorched place where his brother's name had once been, over the blackened scars where other traitors had been erased. In that silence, with only the faint crackle of the gas lamps and the distant mutter of sleeping portraits, Regulus made his first vow. He would not be burned away. He would not be the disappointment. Whatever it cost, he would remain on that tree. He did not yet understand that some graves are chosen, that some names are lost on purpose, that one day his finger would trace that same tapestry and know that the only way to stay true to himself was to vanish from it. The plan was already forming, though he could not have named it. The boy who promised never to be scorched away was already walking, step by careful step, toward the lake where he would choose a different kind of erasure. He did not vanish from the tapestry. Not yet. Instead, the boy who had sworn never to be scorched away stepped into a different kind of inscription. A house, a table, a color that would mark him as the son who stayed. The hat touched his head, and the world narrowed to cloth and whisper and the slow, intimate unfolding of his own mind. It did not ask who he was, it told him. Ambition, yes, and the old black hunger for significance, for a name that would not fade like a cheap replica on a gravestone. Legacy, yes, tangled with duty, with the heavy comfort of doing what was expected. This is important, it murmured, and Regulus knew it was not talking about courage or cleverness, but about belonging. Across the hall there was already a shadow, Sirius, draped in scarlet and gold, laughing too loudly at something the dark-haired boy beside him said. Gryffindor. The word lay between them like a crack in marble. Not Sirius, who had chosen open rebellion and the wild, reckless magic of another house. Regulus sat very still beneath the hat and thought, without words, that someone had to stay where they were meant to be. Slytherin received him like a promise kept. The table that had gone cold when Sirius was sorted warmed again for the younger brother who had not run. Here the black name was not a burden but a banner. Pure bloods clustered around him with easy recognition, the sons and daughters of families whose portraits also watched from ancient walls, whose parents spoke in low, admiring tones of a powerful wizard rising in the east. They did not say Voldemort, not at first. They said heir of Slytherin. They said future. They said plan. In the green-lit common room beneath the lake, Regulus found the echo of home without the constant quarrel. The same talk of bloodlines, of sacred history, of the grave cost of mixing magic with what his parents called filth. Only here, the words were not lectured at him, they were shared, almost reverent, like a story everyone already knew by heart. This is important, they would murmur, tracing family trees in the air with their wands, and he believed them because it felt like relief. He built himself carefully, polite, reserved, academically precise. Professors praised his essays, his potions, the way he listened more than he spoke. He was not a bully, he did not hex first years for sport or sneer at every muggle born in sight. But when it happened in front of him, when a smaller boy was pinned to a wall by an ugly jinx, Regulus looked away. Safety and status required silence. Confrontation belonged to Sirius now. The first cracks appeared not in arguments, but in glances. Regulus would look up at dinner and see Sirius at the Gryffindor table, shoulder to shoulder with James Potter, with Remus Lupin, with Peter Pettigrew. Sirius threw his head back when he laughed, alive in a way that made something in Regulus twist. Was it resentment that his brother had abandoned the script? Was it envy that Sirius seemed unafraid of being alone? Or was it a quieter betrayal, the sense that the person who should have understood him best had chosen another family instead? Sometimes their eyes met across the candles and platters, and for a heartbeat the great hall narrowed to a corridor that might have been crossed. Then James would say something, or a piece of bread would fly, and Sirius would turn away. Down in Slytherin, the water pressed against the windows and the whispers grew darker. They spoke now of a wizard who could not die, of a leader who would restore the old ways, who marked his chosen with living ink. They said he was watching Hogwarts. They said he favored certain families, not Dumbledore, who had built the school into a refuge, but another power, older and less forgiving. Regulus listened. He told himself it was only curiosity, only the natural interest of a black in the movements of history. Yet when the older students spoke of being approached, of secret meetings and impossible magic, his heart beat faster. He leaned in. He listened more closely than he would ever admit, and one night, when the common room had gone almost silent, someone finally spoke his name in the same breath as the Dark Lord's. His name, and not his brother's. This is important, because the familiar gravity of this story pulls almost automatically towards Sirius, toward the boy who ran away at 16, slammed the door on the family tapestry, and chose found family over ancestral grave. Most conversations about the Black brothers orbit that bright rebellious star, the unjust imprisonment, the animagus escape, the godfather who broke out of Azkaban for the sake of a child who was not his own. Sirius's loud defiance made flesh. He fits the myth. Regulus does not. In most retellings, he is a line on a family tree, a locket in a cave, a tragic footnote appended to Sirius's legend. Even when his initials appear in that note, R.A.B., they are treated as a clue in Harry's story, not as the center of their own. Not Dumbledore, who had assembled patterns from fragments of memory and war reports. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins and never once spoke the name Regulus with any particular weight. Not Sirius, who had survived Azkaban and still could not bear to look directly at the idea that his little brother might have chosen a different path into the same darkness. The wizarding world prefers its heroes visible. Dramatic, shouting in the Order's kitchen, riding hippogriffs, flinging spells in open defiance. Fandom follows that pattern with almost ritual devotion. It is easier to celebrate the boy who ran than the boy who stayed. Yet what happens to our understanding of heroism if the more consequential betrayal of Voldemort came not from an escaped convict, but from a dutiful son who walked into the Dark Lord's service with open eyes and a steady hand? This is the pivot. This episode will not follow Azkaban's iron bars, the hollow rattle of Dementors, the wild, hunted years of Sirius's escape. Instead, it will trace the quieter, more insidious trajectory of the brother who did not run. The one who wore the Black family ideals like a second skin, who accepted the dark mark at 16, who stood in green-lit drawing rooms and listened to robed figures speak of destiny and purity and glory, and believed them. At first, fandom often valorizes the visible break, the slammed door, the shouted refusal, the dramatic severing of ties, but there is another kind of resistance. One that looks like obedience until the very last moment. Silent sabotage. A hand that signs the oath and then, years later, writes a different kind of signature at the bottom of a note left beside a stolen locket. Regulus is not the failed version of Sirius. He is the one who chooses to fight from inside the system that built him, knowing that no one will ever sing about what he does. So the camera must move, away from Azkaban stone and howling wind, toward a drawing room washed in emerald fire, silver and green reflected in polished glass. A teenage boy stands there, shoulders straight, dark hair immaculate, listening as cloaked figures speak of conquest. The mark on his forearm is still new, his pulse is steady, and as he steps one pace closer to the circle, he is not running from the darkness at all. He is walking into it, already planning how he will one day turn on the master who marked him. He is marked when the story truly darkens. Not in a battlefield, not in a blaze of glory, but in drawing rooms and corridors where the air itself seems to whisper a single, inevitable future. It begins at dinner. Silver and crystal, green silk and candlelight, the Black family crest watching from the wall like a judge. While Burger speaks of the prophet reports with a kind of hungry pride, Orion weighs ministry decrees as if they are already failures, and in the pauses between courses names are dropped like curses. Malfoy, Lestrange, Rosier, influential purebloods arrive for late visits. Cloaks damp with night air, voices low but never quite low enough. This is important. Regulus listens. He hears the same refrain in a dozen variations. The Dark Lord is not a fringe madman. He is the plan. He is the future. Regulus is 16, a Slytherin seeker, prefect material, the quiet axis around which his parents' hopes now turn. Sirius has defected. The grave where his name once sat on the family tapestry is a scorched hole. The elder son chose rebellion. The younger feels the weight of repair. What does a second son do in a house that worships lineage, if not become a flawless replica of everything the first refused to be? He tells himself it is loyalty. To the House of Black, to a history written in Latin and blood. He tells himself it is fear too, because he has watched what happens to those who disappoint Wilburga, and he has heard what happens to those who disappoint the Dark Lord. But beneath the fear there is something colder and more seductive. The belief that to serve Voldemort is to embody his heritage perfectly, to become the living proof that his line remains pure, unbroken, and useful. The grave was empty where his childhood might have been. In its place stands duty wearing a school uniform. When the summons comes, it is almost mundane. A hand on his shoulder in a shadowed corridor. A murmured time and place. No one asks if he is ready. Readiness is assumed. The ritual is held in a room that smells of stone and damp and old, burned magic. Robed figures ring the walls, their faces half hidden, their attention already elsewhere. Regulus stands before Voldemort, and for a moment the world narrows to pale hands and red eyes that seem to read every thought he has ever buried. Not Dumbledore, who had once looked at him across the great hall with distant, impartial kindness. Not Hagrid, who had laughed with Sirius by the lake years ago. This gaze is different. It does not comfort. It appraises. The touch of the wand on his forearm is almost gentle. The pain is not. It is white and searing, a brand driven past skin into bone, the smell of his own flesh burning, rising like smoke in his throat. He does not scream. He will not. Terror claws at his ribs, but pride stands beside it, rigid and exultant, because the Dark Lord's eyes rest on him and, for a heartbeat, find him acceptable. He is a schoolboy. His textbooks are still open on a dormitory desk, his Quidditch gloves are drying by the fire, and yet here, surrounded by adults who treat this sacrifice as routine, as expected, he binds his life to a man who values nothing but power. No one stops the ceremony. Not Sirius, who had already fled. No one asks him if he understands that this mark is not a charm, but a chain. When it is over, his skin still throbbing, Regulus steps back into the circle with his sleeve lowered and his head high. He believes with a fierce and aching relief that he has finally become the son his parents wanted. He does not yet know that to Voldemort he has become something else entirely. A disposable tool, already half-breed in an unmarked future grave. And the Dark Lord is not finished using him, Voldemort notices him. Not the way he notices Bellatrix, all wild devotion and theatrical cruelty. Not the way he toys with Lucius, dangling favor and punishment like twin blades. Regulus is something quieter in the Dark Lord's orbit, something more useful. A black heir. A pure blood name that still carries weight in every old house worth counting. This is important. In a war built on blood and lineage, Regulus is not merely another masked servant. He is pedigree made alive. The grave of the Black family reputation has not yet been dug, while Burger's shrill pride still means something in certain drawing rooms, and Voldemort understands leverage. A word from Regulus opens doors in Nocturne, loosens tongues at ministry soirees, calms the suspicions of those too cautious to meet the Dark Lord directly. He is valuable precisely because he is not volatile. No mad laughter, no grand speeches, just a reputation for quiet reliability, for doing as he is told and never, ever drawing unnecessary attention. So the missions begin. He is sent on intimidation visits where his presence is the real threat. The black air at your hearth, sipping your tea, mentioning softly what a pity it would be if your children were caught on the wrong side of history. He is dispatched to listen in smoky back rooms while older Death Eaters posture to carry messages that are never written down. To stand at the edge of key meetings and absorb every word. He never leads. But he is always there, always listening, always learning what kind of magic this new world will truly require. Outside that circle, something else is breaking. Sirius is gone from Grimmauld Place, blasted from the tapestry, choosing the Order's future over the family's past. The brothers who once whispered in the same dark bedroom now stand on opposite sides of an invisible line. Regulus hears rumors of a reckless young man in leather robes laughing with James Potter, arguing with people who will one day lead the resistance. Not Sirius, who had run from the house like it was a prison on fire. Regulus stays. He tells himself someone must preserve the name. He witnesses cruelty. At first, he watches. Then sometimes he participates, one steady while others scream. He rationalizes each act as necessary, each broken body as a stepping stone toward a purified world. If the plan is grand enough, surely the cost is justified? The story he tells himself is simple. They are replicas of enemies, not people. The grave was empty of innocence long before he arrived. But the justifications begin to ring hollow the night Voldemort turns his red gaze toward him and says Kreacher's name. A test, the Dark Lord explains, of new magic in a distant hidden place. A house elf is needed. Regulus's own will do. Regulus bows, throat tight, and agrees. He does not yet ask what kind of charm requires a servant to suffer first. He does not yet understand what that choice will cost him. Kreacher goes. And Kreacher comes back. Changed, Kreacher goes. And in the dark cleft of rock where the sea claws at stone and the sky has forgotten its stars, Kreacher arrives. He does not know why. He only knows who has called. His master's master. The Dark Lord whose mark burns on young Regulus's arm and whose name hangs in the air of Grimmauld Place like a poisonous charm. House elves are not asked for consent. They are summoned. So when Voldemort's fingers close around his thin wrist and the world twists, Kreacher obeys. Sidelong apparition tears them from London and spits them out beside a black lake inside a hollowed cliff. The air tastes of salt and old sealed magic. The stone under Kreacher's bare feet is slick and cold, as if it remembers drowning. Overhead there is no moon, no star, no sky at all, only a ceiling of rock that feels like a grave pressed down upon the world. Voldemort moves with the calm of a man inspecting a completed plan. He does not look back to see if the elf is afraid. Fear is assumed. Fear is irrelevant. This is important. The boat appears at his command, small and spectral, a replica of safety that will carry only so much human weight. But Kreacher is not human, and so he is permitted to stand shivering at his master's feet as they glide toward the green glowing island in the center. On the island waits the basin. The potion gleams like liquid emeralds, beautiful the way certain poisons are beautiful. Voldemort explains almost nothing. A test of protections, a measure of endurance. "Drink," he orders. Kreacher obeys. The potion burns his throat, claws at his mind, fills his small body with choking fire and ancient echoing screams. He begs. He sobs. He reaches for the Dark Lord's robes with shaking hands, and Voldemort peels them away as one might remove dirt. Not Dumbledore, who had listened to the broken and the mad. Not Hagrid, who had carried a crying baby through the ruins of a home. This master watches his servant convulse and only notes how many mouthfuls it takes before the elf cannot stand. When the basin is empty, Voldemort is satisfied. The lake stirs. White dead hands break the surface. In Ferry, a ring of drowned waiting bodies close in. Voldemort leaves. He does not look back. The elf has served his purpose. The grave was empty in his calculations. No life here mattered. But there is a flaw. A thing even he, with all his study, has forgotten to fear. House elves are bound to different laws of magic. Kreacher's veins remember another voice, another command. Regulus Black, still almost a boy, had once told his elf with absent affection, "Come home when I call you, Kreacher, always come home." The words settled into the elf's bones like iron. Cold fingers seize him. Water closes over his head. The green potion howls in his skull, and in that moment, clinging to his master's last true order, Kreacher wrenches himself through space and vanishes. He reappears on the kitchen flagstones of Grimmauld Place, soaked, shuddering, alive. He crawls, then collapses at Regulus's boots, words spilling out in broken fragments, green potion that burned like acid, hands from the water, dead faces. A locket on the island that made the air feel wrong, thick as if the room itself could not breathe around it. Regulus listens, very carefully. The loyal son of the House of Black, the proud Death Eater who had believed in purity and order, hears how his Dark Lord used his family's elf as disposable trash. Something in that cave is worth more to Voldemort than a life. Regulus knew then that the story he had been told about power and greatness was a lie. If the Dark Lord would feed Kreacher to the dead for the sake of a single locket, what else would he sacrifice? Who would be next? This is important, because from that night on, Regulus Arcturus Black is still wearing the mark, still answering summons, still walking among murderers. But inside, something has already turned against his master. He has begun to plan. Regulus does not sleep that night. He waits. When Kreacher finally cracks back into existence in the Black family kitchen, the house is silent and cold. A mausoleum lined with portraits that never learned mercy. The elf is shivering, clothes soaked with the cave's black water, muttering apologies to a master who is not there. He is hitting his head against the oven door when Regulus arrives. The grave was empty. Not in Godric's Hollow, but here, in this house, where compassion should have been buried long ago. And yet, Regulus kneels. He catches Kreacher's wrists before the next blow can land, fingers white around the elf's thin arms. He speaks softly, the way no one ever spoke in this kitchen, coaxing instead of commanding, his voice a low, deliberate charm against the elf's rising panic. He dries Kreacher's clothes with a flick of his wand, presses a cup of broth into shaking hands, and waits for the story to come in fragments between sobs and self-punishment. It takes time. Names first. The Dark Lord. A cave. A shore of dead water. Regulus listens as Kreacher describes the potion that burned his throat and mind. The way his screams echoed off the stone while Voldemort watched with clinical interest, as if observing a useful spell rather than a loyal servant drowning in terror. This is important, because Regulus's horror is not only for the blistered mouth and the hands clawed bloody against invisible restraints. It is for what that calm, detached gaze reveals. Voldemort did not see an ancient magical being, bound by old oaths and older love. He saw a tool, a test subject, something to be emptied and discarded to prove that his protections worked. Kreacher speaks of a locket then. Heavy, gleaming, wrong, a thing that seemed to drink the torchlight rather than reflect it, that made the air feel thicker, as if the cave itself were holding its breath. Voldemort's hands on it were reverent and possessive, his voice low as he spoke of hiding it where no one living could reach. Not Dumbledore, who had collected secrets like relics. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins. No one. Regulus knew dark magic. He had grown up with cursed heirlooms and portraits that whispered of blood supremacy in the night. But this was different. Kreacher speaks of how the locket felt alive, how its presence pressed against his mind like a watching eye. He speaks of the Dark Lord's obsession, of the meticulous plan to test every layer of protection with a living body. Something clicks, cold and precise, behind Regulus's ribs. He does not know the word Horcrux. He does not need it. He understands, with the instinct of a black raised among infernal objects, that his master has done something unnatural to his own soul, has torn it, hidden it, anchored it to this obscene replica of a family treasure. Even through the lens of pure blood arrogance, it feels like a violation of a law older than any house. Later, when Kreacher finally sleeps on a folded rag by the hearth, Regulus sits alone in the dark. The mark on his arm pulses faintly, a reminder of oaths sworn at 16, when power had seemed simple and a future obedient. He traces the ink with one finger and for the first time allows the question to fully form. What, exactly, has he bound himself to? And when the answer comes, quiet and merciless, he does not speak it aloud. He only begins to count how many pieces of a soul a man can hide before something else claims the rest. The answer begins here, with a pattern everyone thinks they understand. Death Eaters are supposed to be simple. Masks and cruelty. Torture for sport. A uniform black tide of fanatics who chose the dark mark with clear eyes and empty hearts. In the common telling, there is only one exception. One man whose conscience flickers beneath the skull and serpent. Not Dumbledore, who had watched generations fall. Not Hagrid, who had carried children from ruins. Not Sirius, who had escaped his family's creed only to be caged for it. Only Severus Snape is granted inner conflict. This is important, because that familiar story flattens something far more unsettling. A second traitor in Voldemort's ranks, one whose doubt is colder, stranger, and in some ways more damning than Snape's. Snape's crisis is framed as love for the light, or at least for one woman who stood in it. Regulus Black's crisis is different. His first fracture comes not when he sees what Voldemort does to enemies, but when he sees what Voldemort does to his own. He has been raised in a house where the walls preach blood purity, where the family tree is a grave of burned-out names and the word mudblood is spoken like a curse. Yet in that same house, the house elf is not an abstract symbol of the oppressed. Kreacher is furniture that speaks, yes, but also a constant presence, a rasping voice at the hearth, a creature whose devotion is so complete it becomes a kind of terrible comfort. Regulus grows up with Kreacher as one of the fixtures of being alive, the way another child might grow up with a beloved, overbearing uncle. When Voldemort takes Kreacher to the cave, it is to Regulus almost unthinkable. The Dark Lord does not test the lake with a nameless prisoner or a disposable muggle. He uses the servant of a loyal pure bloodhouse as a living instrument for cursed potion and inferi. He gives no warning, he offers no protection. He leaves Kreacher to die. Kreacher returns because house elf magic and house elf loyalty are older and stranger than Voldemort understands. He returns broken and obedient, telling the story exactly as ordered. And in that flat, unquestioning recital, Regulus hears something that no one else in that house is positioned to hear. The master of his master has treated Kreacher as less than ash, as a replica of a life, not a life. For a boy who has been taught that pure bloods are the apex of creation, this is the pattern interrupt. If a house elf, bound and faithful, can be discarded so easily, what does that say about the value of any life in Voldemort's plan? What does it say about the future of the Blacks, the Malfoys, every name embroidered in silver thread on ancient tapestries? The grave was empty behind the rhetoric. The exaltation is a charm with nothing beneath it. Regulus's conscience does not awaken in a single radiant moment. It calcifies slowly around this revelation, that he has sworn himself to a force that devours indiscriminately, that will one day consume the very blood it claims to protect. From that point, every mission, every order, becomes a step taken with the knowledge that the serpent at his arm is already turning inward. He does not run. He begins instead to consider betrayal. Betrayal for Regulus begins with a story told in fragments, with a house elf's broken sentences whispered in a dark kitchen, hands shaking as he remembers green light on black water. This is important. Kreacher cannot name the magic, but he can describe it. The journey across the poisoned lake. The goblet that refills itself with agony. The locket on the stone island, humming with a presence that feels wrong even to a creature born to serve. Regulus listens, and somewhere between the details of Voldemort's voice and Kreacher's screams, he understands that this is no mere hidden treasure, no simple safeguard for a paranoid master. Something about the object itself feels like a grave that has been dug in the wrong place. He does what Blacks have always done when faced with a mystery too dark for public libraries. He goes home. Not to his parents, but to the shelves that raised them all, the Black family library, where dust lies thick as ash over leather spines and the air tastes of old curses and older pride. Here, every volume is a quiet confession. Here, the truth is never spoken plainly, but it is preserved. He begins with the obvious. Treatises on immortality, on blood rights, on bodies kept unnaturally alive by parasitic charms. Then he moves deeper to the books not meant for children, the ones whose titles have been scored through by anxious ancestors, leaving only impressions in the leather like healed scars. In those half-erased pages he finds it, not the word itself at first, but its outline. Tales of ancient wizards who anchored themselves to objects so that death could claim the body but not the will. warnings that speak of a soul torn, of a man who becomes a kind of living replica of himself, walking and speaking, but no longer whole. The grave was empty, one text insists, describing a Dark Lord whose body was burned and yet whose influence lingered in whispers and visions. Not Dumbledore who had written this, not any modern scholar, these are voices from centuries past. And then there is silence. A deliberate, echoing absence. No contemporary discussion. No ministry classifications. Just a blank space where the discourse should be. As if the wizarding world collectively agreed that even naming this magic would invite it back. Regulus is not a fool. He lays Kreacher's account beside these scattered references and sees the pattern resolve. An object hidden with absurd layers of protection. A magic that twists the air around it. A master who speaks of conquering death not as metaphor but as strategy. He does not yet know the term Horcrux, but he knows what Voldemort has done. He has torn himself apart. He has made anchors. Horror arrives slowly, then all at once. If the locket is one anchor, there must be others. If the soul is divided, killing the man is not enough. It means the war he thought he understood is a replica of the real conflict, a surface battle waged while the true enemy lies buried in objects no one else even suspects exist. He closes the book with careful hands. The mark on his arm burns dully, a reminder of vows already spoken. Regulus Black is still, officially, a loyal Death Eater. But he knows now that unless someone finds and destroys these anchors, Voldemort will never truly die. And he knows, with a cold certainty that settles into his bones, that no one else is even looking. He knows, and there is no one he can tell. The grave of his childhood has already been dug, the Black family drawing room, the tapestry of names like a script of destiny, the quiet pressure to be what Sirius refused to be. This is important, because once Regulus understands that Voldemort has torn his soul and hidden the pieces, the most dangerous thing in his world is not the Dark Lord himself. It is the knowledge now alive in his own mind. He cannot bring it to his parents. Walburga would have called it genius, not monstrosity. Would have praised the elegance of a charm that cheats death and preserves a pure bloodline forever. Orion would have spoken of legacy and endurance, of how such magic proves that the Dark Lord is worthy to remake the world. To confess doubt would not only disappoint them, it would shatter the only approval he has ever reliably known. He cannot send an owl to Sirius. Not Sirius, who had slammed the door on Grimmauld Place and everything it stood for, who would hear the word Horcrux and think only of how his little brother had once knelt to kiss the Dark Lord's hand. What could Regulus even write? That the perfect son has become a traitor in thought, if not yet in deed? He cannot whisper a word to fellow Death Eaters. To question is to invite suspicion, to hesitate is to earn a grave without a marker. Around the long table he sits with his mask in his lap, listening to plans of raids and purges, and every time someone laughs at the idea that Voldemort could ever fall, he feels the mark burn like a brand of stupidity they are all too proud to see. So he lives a double life. By night he answers summons, stands in ruined cottages where the air still smells of blood, watches as Voldemort's wand moves with bored precision. By day, in the stale quiet of Grimmauld Place, he replays Kreacher's story of the cave, cataloguing every detail, The boat that weighed the magic in the blood, the potion that made a mind unravel, the lake where the dead were not dead but waiting. He notes Voldemort's habits, the patterns in his protection. How the Dark Lord trusts old places and old magics, how he prefers traps that feed on fear rather than simple force. Regulus builds, in the privacy of his thoughts, a map of vulnerabilities no one else even suspects. Not Dumbledore, who had begun to suspect something was wrong with Voldemort's survival, but did not know of this locket in a hidden cave. Not Hagrid, who had carried another boy from another ruin and never once imagined that a house elf had already walked into the same darkness. The isolation is absolute. There is no Order of the Phoenix to welcome his doubts, no war room covered in parchment and pins, no mentor bending over a table to help him shape a plan. Just a teenager in a cursed house, a house elf with haunted eyes, and a secret that could end the war if handled perfectly, or end him if mishandled once. The moment hardens on an ordinary night after an ordinary atrocity. A raid on a Muggle village that offered no resistance, only screams that faded too quickly. Regulus returns to Grimmauld Place with Ash still clinging to his robes. Kreacher meets him in the hall, eyes red, hands shaking as he offers tea because there is nothing else he can offer. Regulus looks at him and sees not a servant, but the creature who drank poison because he was ordered to, who felt dead hands dragging him down and still obeyed when told to come home. If he does nothing, this will never end. Not for Kreacher, not for anyone. That night he does not sleep. He walks the corridors like a ghost, tracing the edges of a decision that has already been made. He will not merely steal the locket, he will return it to the cave. He will put the replica in its place and leave a message that says, in the only language Voldemort respects, that he has been betrayed from within. And when he goes back to that shore of green-black water, he knows he will go alone. Because the last person who crossed that lake for Voldemort came back broken. The next one will not come back at all, the lake remembers. Years later, when Harry stands on that same narrow shore beside Albus Dumbledore, the water is as black as it was for Regulus. The air is the same cold, tomb-like stillness. The magic in the stone is unchanged, only the story has moved on. Dumbledore touches his wand to the invisible boat and murmurs words Harry does not yet understand. They cross the lake in silence, the green-black water sliding past like liquid grave dirt. At the island, the basin waits, full of that phosphorescent potion which is not merely a liquid, but a charm made solid, a spell designed to flay the mind instead of the flesh. Dumbledore drinks. Harry watches. This is important, because we have seen this scene so often through Harry's eyes that it feels inevitable, the greatest wizard of the age forcing down goblet after goblet, begging for it to stop, reliving horrors no one else can see, while the boy who loves him can do nothing but obey and keep pouring. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated 100 plans, can outthink this basin. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from another ruin, can burst in and break the spell. Not Sirius, who had once offered Harry a home, can step between him and this particular nightmare. When the last drops are gone, the lake answers. White, dead hands break the surface. In fury swarm the tiny rock, dragging Dumbledore down until fire erupts from his wand and the cavern becomes a furnace. Harry clings to him, half carrying, half dragged, as they flee back across the water. They escape. But the grave was empty long before that night. The locket in Harry's pocket is already a replica, already bearing the neat initials RAB. The truth is that the first time that basin was emptied, there was no phoenix wand, no elder mastery, no veteran of 100 duels to endure its torment. There was a 19-year-old boy who had just discovered what a Horcrux was. Regulus walks into that cave without Dumbledore's knowledge, without the Order's maps, without James and Lily alive in Cornwall tracking his heartbeat on a monitoring charm. He brings only a house elf, a stolen locket, and a plan that is, in its essence, the same near-suicidal mission that will one day almost kill Dumbledore. He will force himself to drink what Kreacher once drank. He will endure what shattered a creature bred to servitude and silence. And there will be no one to pull him from the water. The symmetry is brutal. 2 basins, 2 lockets, 2 boys ordered to watch someone they love be unmade by that potion. Harry holding a goblet to Dumbledore's lips, Kreacher clutching at Regulus's robes as the Inferi close in. Lily was a charms prodigy, but even she could not have written a protection for this place. The cave takes what it is offered. In canon, we watch Harry fight to keep Dumbledore alive. In the shadows of that same narrative, on that same stone, a house elf will be forced to watch his young master die instead. The cave takes what it is offered. Regulus Black understands this in a way Harry will not for years. He listens to Kreacher's broken story until the shape of the magic settles in his mind like a map drawn in blood and salt water. He does not rush. He cannot. This is important. Night after night, in the shuttered rooms of Grimmauld Place, he walks Kreacher back through every moment. The jagged rock at the cave mouth, the taste of the potion, the cold hands dragging. He asks the same questions again and again, until the house elf's memories become something like a precise, terrible replica of the path Voldemort forced him to walk. Where did the boat appear? How far from the shore? How many goblets did he drink? When did the voices begin? Regulus rehearses answers with his wand drawn. He practices fire on conjured dummies that writhe and reach with grey, waterlogged arms. He experiments with summoning charms across darkened rooms, trying to feel the distance at which a goblet might respond. He studies the way Kreacher disapparated out of the lake, searching for the tiny seam in the enchantments that Voldemort, in his arrogance, left for a servant he never expected to survive. He builds a plan not of heroics, but of grim, methodical steps. In, across, potion, locket, fire, out, he knows the risks. Kreacher's shaking hands and hoarse voice have given him more than memory. They have given him a forecast of his own death. He knows the potion will not merely hurt, but unmake him, strip him of dignity and reason. He knows the lake is not water, but a grave, that the bodies within it are not at rest. He knows that when the true locket is gone, Voldemort will feel the wound in his magic like a missing limb and begin to hunt the hand that struck him. So he prepares the only answer he can leave behind. In his childhood room, beneath the tapestry that still proclaims him a dutiful Black, he crafts a fake locket, weight balanced to the ounce, metal dulled and charmed until it is a perfect visual twin. A replica with a different soul. Inside he folds a single piece of parchment and writes the words that will outlive him. The words that are both confession and accusation. To the Dark Lord his hand does not shake. He signs it R.A.B., and, for a moment, allows himself to imagine that someone will read it and understand the truth of what he tried to do. not Sirius, who had run. Someone who will still be alive when this story matters. There is no order behind him. No Dumbledore's plan, no phoenix on a ring, no secret war room mapped with red strings of light. Only a house elf who loves him, and a boy who has decided that if the Dark Lord cannot yet be killed, then his immortality can at least be cracked. This is important. On the last night, he calls Kreacher close and shapes the one command that matters, each word a binding stronger than iron. The grave in the lake may soon hold his body, but the order will endure, not to guard the locket, not to serve the artifact, but to seek its destruction and, with it, the unraveling of the Dark Lord's secret. Regulus does not give Kreacher a suggestion. He gives him a sentence that might as well be a spell. This is important. We know only fragments, reported years later in a kitchen thick with dust and bitterness. But the shape of the command is clear. Regulus orders Kreacher to return to the cave with him. He orders Kreacher to obey, to take the real locket when told, to bring it home. And then the core, the iron at the center, Kreacher is to destroy the locket, and he is never to speak of what happened in that cave unless a true heir of the House of Black commands it. Each clause is a chain. Each word is a key turned in a lock that will not open for decades. For a house elf, such words are not metaphor, they are structure. House elves are bound to families by magic older than the ministry, older than the school, older than the grave of any black ancestor whose portrait still mutters in Grimmauld Place. When a master gives a direct order, it does not sit beside whims and preferences. It carves a channel through the elf's will, a path so deep that even grief cannot quite fill it. Kreacher does not merely choose to obey. He is held upright by obedience when everything else in him wants to collapse. So when Regulus dies, the command does not. The young master's body is lost beneath a black lake, but the mission remains horribly, fiercely alive inside Kreacher. He returns alone, clutching the false locket like a cursed relic, and finds that no one is waiting, no one asks, no one wants the story. Not Dumbledore, who had guessed at dark artifacts but never thought to question the elf in the old black house. Not Sirius, who had fled that house and its magic and could not imagine that his quiet brother had died a traitor to the Dark Lord. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry past that very doorstep, unaware of the secret sealed just beyond it. Silenced by the order, Kreacher folds inward. The command to destroy the locket becomes the axis of his existence. But he has no tools, no guidance, no master who cares to know. The locket resists every blow, every charm, every desperate attempt, and his failure curdles into obsession. When Mundungus steals it, he is frantic. When it hangs on Umbridge's throat, he is maddened. When it returns to Grimmauld Place around Harry's neck, his outrage is almost reverence. Who is this boy to wear Regulus's unfinished work like an ornament? The answer shifts everything. Harry listens. Harry asks. Harry orders Kreacher to tell the truth and, crucially, honors the dead Black who tried to unmake Voldemort. In that moment, the command and the heir finally align. Kreacher's hatred tilts, slowly, into a grudging, then fervent loyalty, because someone at last treats Regulus's plan as more than a footnote. And on the last night of Regulus's life, before any of this can unfold, master and servant turn on the spot together. They apparate toward the cave, one bound by magic he cannot disobey, the other walking toward a death that from a distance looks indistinguishable from ordinary obedience. They arrive where it began. The same stretch of desolate coastline, the same knife-edged rocks cutting up from the Black Sea, the same salt-stained wind that seems to carry whispers of a grave no one has ever seen. Regulus stands very straight on the shingle, cloak snapping around him. Kreacher trembles at his side. The elf remembers this place with a clarity that is its own kind of curse. The rough pull of Voldemort's hand, the command that sliced through his mind, the green boat on the black water, the taste of that potion like liquid despair. This is important. The magic of memory is not gentle here. The cliff face looms sheer and indifferent. Regulus lifts his wand and traces the invisible seam in the rock that only those who know the plan can find. The charm yields, silent and unseen, and the doorway opens like a wound. There is no fanfare, no flash, only the oppressive hush of a tomb accepting its next occupant. They step inside. The temperature drops. Sound dies. The passage narrows until it feels less like a corridor and more like a throat, swallowing them toward the chamber where Voldemort once rehearsed immortality on a creature he considered beneath notice. Not Dumbledore, who had spent his life cataloguing dark magic, knew the full story of what had happened here. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from another ruin, knew that another boy had walked willingly into this one. Kreacher whimpers as the cavern opens around them, vast and echoing. The lake lies still as polished obsidian. Its surface so perfectly calm it looks almost like a replica of the starless ceiling above. The stone island waits at its heart. The boat appears when Regulus touches the water with his wand. The same boat that once bore a house elf to torment. It is small. It is sufficient. It is a coffin that floats. On the island, the basin gleams with that faint, sickly light. The potion has refilled because Voldemort's protections reset like a ritual that refuses to end. The grave was empty, but the cup is not. Kreacher clutches Regulus's robes, voice breaking as he begs again and again for his master not to drink. He speaks of fire in the veins, of voices in the dark, of hands dragging, of a thirst that feels like one's own throat turning to ash. Regulus listens. His face is calm in the way of someone who has already stepped past fear into decision. He takes the locket replica from his pocket, the false heart he will leave behind. He presses it into Kreacher's hands, and then, with a steadiness that feels almost like defiance, he gives the command that will shatter them both. Kreacher is to make him drink. Every drop, no matter what he says, no matter how he screams, no matter how he begs. The first cup goes down like poison made of memory. Regulus convulses, choking, eyes gone wide with visions the viewer is never granted. The second cup tears a raw cry from his throat. By the third, his hands claw at the stone, nails splitting, as he pleads with Kreacher to stop, to obey, to disobey, his words collapsing into incoherence. Kreacher obeys. He must. The magic of the order binds him more tightly than any chain. This is the tragic inversion. Where Voldemort tested his charm on a servant he was willing to discard, Regulus offers himself in that same basin, a deliberate sacrifice laid where another's cruelty once stood. He protects Kreacher with the only shield he has left, his own body, his own mind, his own descent into madness. Cup after cup, vision after vision. until at last the basin is dry and Regulus is barely conscious, shuddering, whispering fragments of apologies to people who will never know he died for a truth he uncovered too late. Kreacher reaches for the locket, fingers closing around the cold metal that has cost so much. And as he does, the lake behind him stirs. Just a ripple at first. Then another. Then many. Something beneath the surface has smelled the living. And it is waking. The lake breaks first in whispers. Then in hands. Pale fingers pierce the black surface one after another, as if the water itself is growing bone. Arms follow, slick and corpse white, dragging ruined robes and sunken chests into the torchlight. Dead eyes lift in eerie unison, all of them fixing on the boy who has dared to touch their master's treasure. The grave was empty, and the lake has come to correct that. Regulus is on his knees beside the basin, breath ragged, throat raw from potion and screams he never allowed himself to make. His hands shake so violently he can barely close them, but he forces his fingers to obey. This is important. He claws at the chain, tears the real locket from his neck, and fumbles in his robes for the replica he crafted in a quiet black library where portraits slept and no one knew what he planned to do. Metal scrapes stone. The fake locket lands in the basin with a dull, definitive sound. A replacement. A lie. A charm-wrought echo of the object he has stolen, carrying not magic but meaning. Regulus presses the true Horcrux into Kreacher's hands, pushing until the elf's fingers curl around it, until the cold weight is no longer his to bear. "Kreacher," he whispers, voice shredded, "take it. Keep it safe. Destroy it if you can. You must go home." Behind them, the Inferi are fully risen now. They move without breath, without sound, a tide of grey flesh and dripping hair. Not Dumbledore, who had studied every forbidden corner of magic he could reach, would have stood here unshaken. Not Hagrid, who had carried a baby from another ruined house, would have called these things anything but wrong. A hand, icy and unyielding, clamps around Regulus's ankle. Kreacher flinches, a small, strangled sound escaping him as another dead hand seizes his young master's calf. Regulus sways but does not fight to free himself. His eyes, fever-bright and already dimming, never leave Kreacher's face. "You must go," he says again, more command than plea now. "You will obey me. You will leave me. You will return to Grimmauld Place. That is an order." Kreacher's world splits on that word. Obedience is carved into him, an old grave of compulsion and habit, but love is older still. He had watched this boy grow from frightened child to proud heir, had seen the moment the story changed, the night Regulus came back from this very cave with horror in his eyes and a new secret plan in his voice. Now that plan demands that he abandon the one witch or wizard who ever treated him as something more than property. The Inferi pull. Regulus slides toward the water, heels carving desperate tracks in the damp stone. He does not reach for his wand. He reaches for Kreacher, fingers brushing the elf's face in a clumsy, almost parental touch. "Go," he orders, and the magic of the house-elf bond snaps tight. Kreacher vanishes with a crack, the Horcrux clutched to his chest, last sight of his master, a pale hand disappearing beneath the black surface. Silence returns to the cave as the water stills, as if nothing living had ever stood there at all. On the stone pedestal, the fake locket rests where the real one once lay, its metal cool, its chain coiled like a question. Inside, a folded scrap of parchment waits, bearing a truth that will sleep for decades, signed only with 3 letters that no one is yet ready to understand. R.A.B. Who will read it when the dead finally speak? The parchment unfolds like a wound reopening. The ink is dry, the voice is not. Regulus begins with a sentence that should have been impossible in his world to the Dark Lord. I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret, and I intend to destroy it. In 13 words, he does what no Death Eater is meant to do. He speaks to Voldemort as an equal. The address is not groveling, not titled, not adorned, not my lord, not master, but to the Dark Lord, a label, almost a heading, as if he were cataloguing an artifact rather than bowing to a god. This is important. The boy who once knelt in reverence now writes as a witness for the grave, naming the tyrant without surrendering to him, fixing him in language the way the cave fixed the locket in stone. He states the fact of his own death with the same cold clarity. I know I will be dead long before you read this. No plea for mercy, no offer to return, no bargaining. He has seen the inferi. He has watched Kreacher drown and be forced back to life by command and charm. He understands the price of touching Voldemort's magic, and he writes as if he is already a ghost, as if the hand holding the quill were only a replica of the one that will be dragged under. Yet the line that follows is pure defiance. I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret, and I intend to destroy it. Not Dumbledore, who had spent decades tracing whispers of dark experiments. Not Hagrid, who had carried prophecies and children alike. Not Sirius, who had raged against his family's creed. A 17-year-old in a cursed cave writes the sentence that shifts the war, even if no one alive will understand it for years. He signs it not with his name, but with 3 letters, R.A.B. The choice is both shield and confession. Shield, because if a Death Eater finds the note, the initials could be any pure blood scion, any black cousin, any forgotten follower. Confession, because anyone who knows Horcruxes, who knows the House of Black, who knows the tapestry burned and scorched in Grimmauld Place, will be able to follow that thread back to Regulus Black. The grave was empty, but the initials are a marker all the same. There is fear in the note, but it is the fear of a man who has already decided. He does not pretend he will survive the potion. He does not ask Voldemort why. He simply records what he has done and why he has done it, trusting that someone, someday, will read and understand that a loyal son of a dark house chose to break the story of his own lineage. The note becomes a hinge in the narrative of the war. It is the only surviving evidence of his betrayal, the single scrap that will later guide Dumbledore and Harry back into that same cave, step by step, drink by drink, following the path Regulus cut through the Dark Lord's immortality. Without that parchment, the locket remains a myth. With it, Voldemort's soul becomes a map. And here the pattern breaks. Snape's truth will spill later in a pensive, silver memories swirling, protected by Dumbledore's design. Regulus's truth is ink on parchment, left in a stone basin beside poisoned water, fragile enough to rot, to burn, to be swept away by one careless wave. Yet that frail confession, unsigned in full, unspoken aloud, is powerful enough to crack the illusion that Voldemort cannot die. Lily was a charms prodigy, but it is Regulus's unadorned handwriting that first reaches forward across time and quietly says he can be killed. The parchment waits in the dark. The cave is silent. The grave was empty. Far from the poisoned water and the stone basin, a different silence unfolds. Kreacher returns the way he left, with a crack of displaced air and the faint smell of salt and rot, stumbling into the kitchen of Grimmauld Place as if the house itself has spat him back. He is alone. He is shivering. His gnarled fingers are locked around a heavy locket that is not a replica, that hums with a magic too old and cruel for words. Regulus has given him an order. This is important. He is not to speak of what happened unless he is asked directly. Not to wail it, not to volunteer it, not to sob it in the night. House elf magic tightens around his throat like a second collar, and so when the house asks where its younger son has gone, Kreacher can only rock by the fire and keen without language, stroking the locket as if it were a living thing. How does a family like the Blacks learn that their heir is dead? Not from Dumbledore, who had watched so many names vanish from his rosters that another meant little in the ledgers of war. Not Hagrid, who had never set foot past the front door of number 12. Not Sirius, who had slammed that door behind him years before and sworn never to return. More likely, it is a curt owl on stiff parchment, a dark mark burned in miniature into the corner, informing Regulus Black that her son fell in the Dark Lord's service. No details, no grave, no body. On the tapestry in the hall, a thin line of embroidered life is scorched away with a hiss. Regulus Black, 1961-1979. The burn mark is small, almost neat, but the sound Wilburga makes when she sees it is not. It tears down the stairwell, a mother's wail sharpened by fanaticism, echoing off portraits and silver and stone until even the screaming faces in their frames fall silent. The tragic irony is simple and absolute. They believe he died as he lived, the perfect black son, one raised for the creed they worshipped, a boy who corrected Sirius's heresies and wore the dark mark with dutiful pride. They never suspect he died betraying the cause they had built their lives around, that his last clear thought was not devotion to Voldemort but a plan to unmake him. Kreacher knows. Kreacher was there. His grief has nowhere to go but inward, folding in on itself like a collapsing charm. He polishes the locket until his fingers bleed, muttering Regulus's name under his breath, cursing anyone who dares to touch it, to mock it, to suggest it is anything less than sacred. In a house crammed with cursed heirlooms and dark artifacts, this one object becomes the axis of his world, the last pure loyalty left alive in him. So the years pass. The house decays. Dust settles on black family silver, on ancestral wands, on portraits that pretend not to see. And in a drawing room cabinet, behind moth-eaten curtains and a veneer of ordinary filth, a single locket lies unrecognized, containing both a fragment of Voldemort's soul and the final unspoken wish of the boy who stole it. Who will open it? Who will understand what it cost? Who will open it? Who will understand what it cost? For years, the answer is simple and terrible. No one. The locket sleeps, and with it, the memory of the boy who walked into the cave and never came back. In the official story of the war, Regulus Black does not exist. Not really. He is a fading name on an ancient tapestry, a burn mark's neighbor, a footnote in Sirius's bitter recollections. This is important. Across 7 books, his life surfaces only in fragments. A curt explanation from Sirius about the obedient little brother who joined the Death Eaters. A cryptic set of initials in a note hidden inside a counterfeit locket. A name Harry reads once and does not yet understand. The grave was empty because there was never a grave at all. Just a space in the narrative where a headstone should have been. The Order of the Phoenix fights and bleeds and mourns, but they do not mourn him. How could they? To them, Regulus is one more masked figure on the wrong side, another pure blood heir seduced by dark magic and ideology, another young man who chose the mark and died somewhere in the shadows. Not Dumbledore, who had spent years tracing Voldemort's past and cataloguing his horrors, ever pauses to ask why a Slytherin heir vanished from the ranks. Not Hagrid, who had carried bodies and broken wands from battlefields, ever speaks his name over fire whiskey and grief. In their ledger of the dead, he is an unexamined number. Sirius's ignorance completes the erasure. He knew a different Regulus, the dutiful son, the mother's favourite, the boy who stayed when Sirius ran. When he talks to Harry in that dim kitchen at Grimmauld Place, his words are edged with old contempt. Regulus was a believer, he says. Regulus wanted to join Voldemort. He frames his brother as the perfect black replica, the one who fulfilled the family plan. And because he never learned about the cave, he never revises that judgment. Every time he spits on the black name, every time he gestures to the tapestry as proof that blood purity is rot, he unknowingly buries the only black who tried to unmake Voldemort's immortality. The wider wizarding world prefers it that way. War demands simple categories: heroes who were right, villains who were wrong, traitors who crossed the line only once and never came back. Where, in that moral architecture, is the space for a Death Eater who dies trying to destroy a Horcrux? For a boy whose dark mark is still burning on his arm as he chooses to drown beneath an undead lake? Complexity is inconvenient. Nuance does not fit on chocolate frog cards. And so the house stands. The tapestry hangs. Years later, a thin, underfed boy will sleep in Regulus's childhood home, walk past his stitched name, and feel a heavy locket thud against his chest as he climbs the stairs, never guessing whose initials are carved into its hidden history. Not yet. Not tonight. But when that boy grows up and the locket's secret finally breaks the surface, the story the world reaches for is not Regulus's, it is Snape's. Severus Snape is framed as the redeemed Death Eater, the one whose grave history is laid bare in silver memory. The Pensieve becomes a stage, and on that stage his love for Lily, his anguish, his double life for Dumbledore are given centre light. This is important. The narrative bends around his guilt and devotion, asking the reader to re-evaluate a man they thought they knew, to see the greasy, bitter professor as a tragic guardian who stood between Harry and the grave. But pause there. Pattern interrupt. What if the camera is pointed at the wrong traitor? Because years before Snape bears his soul in glass vials, there is another Death Eater who never confesses to anyone, never kneels in Dumbledore's office, never asks for forgiveness. Regulus Black does not become a replica of Snape's arc. He is its dark, inverted twin. A teenager who never switches sides publicly, who never gains an old wizard's trust, and yet somehow stumbles upon the darkest truth of Voldemort's magic and walks alone into an undead lake to tear one piece of that soul away. Compare their motives, not their theatrics. Snape is driven by love and by guilt, by the knowledge that Lily died because he carried a prophecy to the wrong master. His redemption is a private bargain with himself. Protect the boy, honor the woman. The plan is intimate, almost domestic in its focus on a single child. Regulus's turn is colder, more abstract, and in some ways more terrifying. He hears Kreacher's account of the cave, sees what was done to a house elf he had ordered and scolded since childhood, and something in him revolts. not at an insult to his pride, but at the casual torture, at the mutilation of the soul itself. Lily was a charms prodigy, but even she never touches Horcrux magic. Snape studies it in books and in whispered theory. Regulus confronts it in practice. He is horrified, not because he has lost a beloved, but because he has glimpsed what it means to tear one's essence apart and hide it in a locket guarded by corpses. There is no promise of absolution for him, no Dumbledore to say his courage will be remembered, no child whose survival will cleanse his name. He expects to die in that cave and to be called a coward or a fool by the very family whose ideals led him there. So why does the story of redemption belong almost entirely to Snape? Has the spectacle of his memories, the theatrical reveal of the Patronus and the Always, overshadowed a quieter, equally consequential act of betrayal that left no body, no witnesses, no grave the world visits? The grave was empty. The note was unsigned to all but 3 initials. If Snape is the Death Eater who turned for love, Regulus is the Death Eater who turned for principle. One man is carved into history, the other is carved into a locket no one understands, and history barely remembers his name. Regulus disappears into the cave and into the lake, and the story seems to end there. No body, no funeral, no grave the world visits. The grave was empty, and yet, a few years later, the war spills into a different kind of tomb. Number 12, Grimmauld Place. A house sealed with old magic and older grudges, where dust lies like ash over the relics of a dying pureblood line. When the Order of the Phoenix begins its quiet occupation, they do what all desperate armies do in borrowed spaces. They clean. The cleaning is a montage in Harry's 5th year, a blur of cursed objects and shrieking portraits, of Molly's orders and Sirius's brittle jokes. In that blur, there is a cupboard. In that cupboard, there is a locket. Heavy, gaudy, fitted with a stubborn, invisible lock. They pass it from hand to hand, frown at it, tug at it. It will not open. It is thrown with other unwanted things into a sack. This is important. No one in that room understands what they are touching. Not Dumbledore, who had once stood on that very threshold and read the tapestry of the Black family like a list of casualties. Not Sirius, who had fled this house and its ideology, never imagining that his quiet, dutiful brother had already turned its darkest secret against the Dark Lord himself. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from one ruined home to another, unaware that the weapon Regulus stole would one day brush the boy's fingers in an afternoon of housework. The dramatic irony is almost unbearable when seen in retrospect. Harry, still a child in many ways, is already physically handling the object Regulus died to steal. The locket bumps against his palm, gleams briefly in the half-light of the drawing room, and vanishes again into obscurity. The war Regulus began does not announce itself with prophecy or with fanfare. It hides in a cupboard. Years later, in the chill, hunted days of Deathly Hallows, the truth coils back on them. The trio sits in that same house, now a refuge and a prison, and realizes with a kind of sickened clarity that the Horcrux they need was once under this roof. Under their noses. In their hands. The memory of that unopenable trinket becomes a wound. How many times had they walked past the cupboard? How many times had Regulus's final act brushed the edge of their story unseen? In that moment, the narrative thread tightens. Regulus is no longer a footnote on a family tree or 3 initials on a crumpled note in a cave. His betrayal becomes the hidden prologue of the Horcrux hunt, the first move in a plan he would not live to see. They never meet him. They never hear his voice. But they inherit his war. Every time the locket hangs against Harry's chest, whispering poison, dragging at his neck like a private gravity. It echoes the last weight Regulus ever held in his hands. The metal is the same. The magic is the same. Only the bearer has changed, and the story is finally catching up. The grave was empty in another way too, not just the corporeal echoes and the replicas and the careful, hidden plan of Harry's parents, but the silence around a different boy who had died for the same war in the same place, with no name carved in stone. This is important, because the first time his story is told aloud, it happens in a kitchen, not a battlefield. Harry stands in the shadowed gloom of Grimmauld Place, master of a house he never wanted, master of a creature he does not understand. The locket has already burned against his skin, already whispered its poison. Now he needs the truth. He faces Kreacher, the ancient elf who has muttered Regulus's name like a private prayer for years, and he gives an order that is also a summons to the past. Tell me what happened to this locket. At first, Kreacher resists. His voice is thin, evasive, clinging to old patterns of secrecy and insult, the brittle armor of a servant whose world has been stripped away. But Harry presses, not with cruelty, but with a grim insistence that feels older than his years. He has seen a cave like this in Dumbledore's memories. He has watched Inferi rise from black water. He knows there is a grave somewhere beneath that lake. He just does not yet know whose. Slowly, the reluctance cracks. Kreacher's hands twist in his rag, his great eyes fill. He speaks of young Master Regulus, who was kind to him when no one else in the noble and most ancient House of Black bothered to see a house elf as anything but furniture. He speaks of the night the Dark Lord took him, forced potion down his throat, left him to die among the dead. Not Dumbledore, who had theorized about Horcruxes in quiet, scholarly horror. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins. Not Sirius, who had run from this house and its creed. Only Regulus sent Kreacher back and listened. Kreacher's voice breaks when he reaches the second journey to the cave. Regulus, alone, Regulus, understanding at last what kind of magic Voldemort had made, and what it meant to tear his soul. Regulus, forcing Kreacher to take the locket and go home, obeying a final command that was also a death sentence. The water closing, the Inferi dragging, the boy no one mourned disappearing into the black. Harry listens, and something shifts. Shock first that a Death Eater could have turned. Then empathy, sharp and unbidden, for a Slytherin teenager who walked into the same horror Harry will later face without a headmaster, without a wand raised in guidance. Respect follows, quiet and grave, as he realizes that years before he was even alive, someone inside Voldemort's own ranks tried to end the same evil he is hunting now. This is where loyalty changes shape. Harry does what no Black ever did. He honors Regulus aloud. He promises Kreacher that the locket will be destroyed, that the mission Regulus began will be finished. In that moment, the old bitter elf bends not to a master by blood, but to a boy who treats his dead with reverence. The magic of that respect is its own kind of charm. By the time Kreacher is clattering pans and planning, truly planning, for Harry's cause, the balance of the house has turned. The grave was empty, but the story is no longer. Harry now knows a Horcrux has already been stolen once, that Voldemort has already been betrayed from within. The question is simple and terrible. Can he do what Regulus could not? and survive the cave that has already claimed one life? The cave has claimed one Black already. This is important, because to understand what Harry is walking into, the story must widen, must step back from the locket and look instead at the brothers whose lives bent around it without ever touching. Sirius Black rebelled by flight. He ran from the ancestral house, from the scorched family tapestry, from the grave expectations of a line that worshipped blood as if it were a god. He chose Gryffindor, chose the Potters, chose a world in which magic was not a weapon of supremacy, but a shared language of defiance. His rebellion was loud, incandescent, a door slammed so hard the portraits shook. Regulus Black rebelled by obedience. He stayed. He let the tapestry keep his name. He wore the Black family crest and, at 16, the dark mark, as if he had accepted the plan his parents had written for him before he was even born. He became the good son, the one who did not shout at dinner, who did not throw plates, who did not run. Yet that same obedience became his weapon. He walked into Voldemort's ranks, into the heart of the ideology Sirius had fled, and then, silently, began to hollow it from within. Both brothers turned against Voldemort. That is the quiet symmetry beneath all the noise. Sirius joined the Order of the Phoenix, a man who wanted the world to know exactly where he stood, who would rather die on a battlefield than live in a drawing room. Regulus remained a Death Eater, a shadow among shadows, his opposition written not in speeches, but in a single note left beside a stolen Horcrux. One brother fought in open rooms, the other fought in a cave no one would ever see. Not Dumbledore, who had mapped the Dark Lord's soul with academic precision, fully grasped the emotional geometry of that household. Not Hagrid, who had carried Sirius's godson from the ruins, knew that another Black had already died trying to make those ruins possible. Not Sirius, who had rotted 12 years in Azkaban, calling his brother a coward, understood that Regulus had walked deliberately into a grave so that someone else might one day have a chance to live. The tragedy is not only that they never reconciled, it is that they never even spoke the same language of resistance. Imagine Sirius in Grimmauld Place, pacing beneath the Black family tree, spitting curses at the burn mark where his own name had been erased, never realizing that the untouched Regulus beside it was a kind of replica. A lie. The boy his parents praised was already dead, already lying in black water under a ceiling of rock. If he had known, if someone had placed the locket and the note in his hand and said, "Your brother died betraying Voldemort, not serving him," the bitterness might have cracked. The self-loathing, the belief that nothing good could come from the House of Black, might have shifted, just slightly, toward mercy. For Regulus, for himself. The grave was empty of understanding between them, yet the pattern is unmistakable. The House of Black produced not one but two men who tried to break free of its darkness, one by running from it, one by walking straight into its heart. Harry is about to follow both paths at once. The grave was empty of understanding, but not of consequence. Regulus's choice in that darkness forces a question that neither Sirius nor Harry ever truly asks. In a war built on secrets, was he right to walk into the cave alone? On parchment, another path gleams almost obviously. He could have gone to Dumbledore. He could have sought the Order, exposed the locket, confessed the existence of a Horcrux before the word had ever passed Harry's lips. But would they have believed him? Not Dumbledore, who had watched Death Eaters torture and murder his students, who had seen pure blood heirs take the mark and never look back. who had no reason to trust the good son of the House of Black. It is one thing to imagine Dumbledore as an all-seeing guardian. It is another to picture him lowering his wand when a branded Slytherin steps out of the shadows and claims to have discovered the secret of the Dark Lord's immortality. This is important. Regulus does not live in a story where confessions are neatly heard and forgiven. He lives in a world where Voldemort's followers kill one another for the appearance of disloyalty, where a whispered doubt can become a death sentence before a warning ever reaches the Order's door. To approach Dumbledore is not simply to risk being dismissed as a trap, it is to risk dying in the street, his knowledge dissolving with him, the locket left untouched in its poisoned lake. There is another layer. Regulus almost certainly underestimates the scale of the horror he has uncovered. He knows of a locket, of a ritual that tears the soul, of a cave turned into a graveyard by magic so cruel it makes Kreacher weep. He does not know there are more, scattered like malignant replicas across Britain. If he believes the locket is the anchor, not an anchor, then the plan to strike alone is not arrogance, it is urgency. One mission, one object. One life weighed against the end of Voldemort himself. Yet even in solitude he does not go entirely alone. He brings Kreacher. The moral weight of that decision is enormous. Regulus shields the elf from the potion, forces it down his own throat, but still drags Kreacher back into the cave's cold, still air, into a ring of Inferi waiting just beneath the water. He binds him with a command that is both protection and sentence: return home, destroy the locket if you can, and tell no one. For a house elf, obedience is not a choice, it is the axis of being. Regulus spares Kreacher's body and shackles his mind to a lifelong, corrosive secret. And yet, what is the alternative? If Regulus does nothing, Voldemort's soul remains perfectly guarded. The locket never leaves the lake. Harry one day inherits a war in which the Dark Lord's immortality is not merely resilient but intact, every Horcrux still hidden, every safeguard untested. Dumbledore's later quest becomes not desperate but impossible. In that light, the ethics blur. A young man chooses to gamble his own life and Kreacher's peace against the chance, only the chance, that one piece of Voldemort can be torn away. He does it without allies, without confession, without any hope that his name will be cleared or his grave honored. In a conflict where the Order hoards intelligence and Voldemort hoards immortality, Regulus chooses a third path, a solitary, almost silent rebellion. He trusts that the truth, sealed in a fake locket and a house elf's memory, will surface long after he is gone. Someone will find it. Someone will read the note signed R.A.B. And the war will change. Someone will find it. Someone will read the note signed R.A.B. And somewhere, years later, another man will fall in a green flash from a tower, and the world will argue about which of them bled more for the same war. To weigh Regulus against Severus Snape is to place two very different kinds of sacrifice on the same grave, cold scale. Snape's story is long, visible, threaded through every year Harry is alive at Hogwarts. Regulus's is brief, almost a whisper, sealed in a cave and a locket. Yet both men, bound first to Voldemort and then to something harder, made a plan that would end with their own deaths. Snape's sacrifices are measured in years. He lives as a double agent, moving between Dumbledore's office and Voldemort's inner circle, each meeting a fresh exposure to legitimacy, suspicion, and the constant possibility of a single fatal mistake. This is important. He carries the knowledge of the prophecy, the unbearable weight that his own words set Harry's fate in motion. He agrees to kill Dumbledore, to become the instrument of the headmaster's final terrible charm, a death arranged as protection, a murder staged as loyalty so that Voldemort will trust him completely. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated his own end, not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from Godric's Hollow, ever bore that exact burden, to raise a wand against the one man who believed in him without condition, and do it knowing the boy watching would hate him for it. Snape dies at Voldemort's feet, his throat torn, his memories spilling out like a last confession, revealing, only when it is too late for him, where his allegiance truly lay. Regulus's sacrifices are compressed into a few decisive years. He joins the Death Eaters as a teenager, the perfect black heir, steeped in pure blood ideology Sirius rejected. He has no Dumbledore to guide him, no order plan laid out on parchment. What he has is Kreacher's story of the cave, the locket, the potion, the casual way Voldemort used a house elf as a disposable test subject. From that single horrific mission, Regulus deduces Horcruxes, immortality, the shape of a magic so foul it makes even a loyal Slytherin heir recoil. He understands enough to know the scale of the blasphemy, but not the broader strategy. He does not know about the prophecy, Harry, or the full count of Horcruxes. Still, he walks back into the cave with a fake locket, a solitary charm, and a house elf, fully aware that he will not walk out again. The grave was empty because his body never returns. It lies in Blackwater among the inferi, while his stolen locket waits in a London townhouse for a boy not yet born. Snape's information shields Harry for years, shapes every move of the final campaign. Regulus's theft removes one of Voldemort's anchors before the war even truly begins, turning an immortal tyrant into something slightly more killable. So if you had to choose whose single decisive act cut deeper into Voldemort's seeming invincibility, Snape's killing curse on Dumbledore or Regulus's hand closing around the locket in that cursed lake, whose would you name, and why? And what if the answer changes once we follow that locket into the hands of the boy who never knew either man while they were alive? The locket moves forward in time. The men attached to it do not. And this is where the old Hogwarts story about who gets to be a hero begins to fracture. For a generation, the pattern had been simple enough to feel like truth. Gryffindors charged, Slytherins corrupted, Hufflepuffs endured, Ravenclaws observed. The grave of expectation was deep. The narrative said courage wore red and gold, while green and silver meant ambition curdled into cruelty. There were footnotes, of course, uneasy exceptions that teachers mentioned with a frown. Slughorn, who cultivated talent like a gardener collecting rare blooms. Snape, who murdered a headmaster and yet somehow died on the side of the light. But even those names were framed as anomalies, as if Slytherin goodness required a kind of moral mutation. Regulus Black does not fit that footnote. He does not renounce Slytherin, he weaponizes it. This is important, because the same traits that led a 16-year-old boy to bare his arm for the Dark Mark are the ones that later let him conceive a plan that not Dumbledore, who had spent years tracing rumors of Horcruxes, ever managed to execute in secret. Ambition, turned inward, becomes an intolerable standard. Voldemort must be worthy of the faith Regulus had placed in him. Cunning, sharpened by black family politics, becomes the ability to see the fault line in a seemingly invincible magic and step directly onto it. Loyalty to his own does not vanish, it narrows and clarifies until his own means a single house elf shivering on a drawing-room floor. When Kreacher returns from the cave, poisoned and half-mad, Regulus listens. He listens the way pureblood heirs are trained to listen at closed doors, to hear what is not being said. Voldemort had used Kreacher as a disposable instrument, a living charm component, confident that house elf obedience would erase all trace. But the Dark Lord had misread the very magic he exploited. He knew how to command. He did not know how to be loved. Regulus sees the opening. A Horcrux hidden in a cave that requires servitude to reach its heart. A master who believes his servants incapable of betrayal. A lake of inferi that answer to whoever holds the locket. Out of these grim elements, he builds a plan that looks, from the outside, like simple suicide, but is in fact a piece of ruthless Slytherin strategy. Strike at the anchor, leave a message. Die in a way that cannot easily be traced back to your family. And trust that the magic of a house elf will carry the truth further than any owl. He does not storm a battlefield. He does not summon an army. He walks back into the cave with Kreacher alone and uses the tools of the dark world against itself. From the inside, the fake locket he carries is a quiet act of defiance. A replica that says, "I understand your method well enough to counterfeit it." The grave was empty of recognition for this. Not Hagrid, who had ferried another boy across another black lake, knew the name Regulus Black as anything more than a line on a tapestry. Not Sirius, who had fled the same house but never learned what his brother became at the end, understood that Slytherin courage could look like kneeling in cold water, ordering your only companion to live. What would Hogwarts have been if the stories had named that courage? If first years had heard about the Slytherin who saw the horror in his own side and turned his ambition toward dismantling it? Perhaps the house tables would have looked different. Perhaps the boy who opened the fake locket in a forest years later would have spoken Regulus's name alongside Harry's, not found it buried as an afterthought in a dusty bedroom. The magic did not care about house colors, the lake did not, the inferi did not. But the living did, and so a particular kind of heroism sank quietly beneath the surface, leaving only a note signed R.A.B. And a question that still lingers: how many more Slytherins might have followed if they had been told that this too was what their courage could be? The grave was empty long before anyone knew there was a grave to look for. Regulus's choice did not end in that cave, it began a line of consequences that would run, quiet and relentless, all the way to the Battle of Hogwarts. This is important. Because when he forced the locket from its stone basin and left the replica with his shaking note, he did something Voldemort never planned for. He removed a piece of the Dark Lord's soul from the one place only Voldemort understood. Kreacher went home. He carried the real locket back to Grimmauld Place, back to the decaying house that had made both Black brothers and broken them in different ways. He obeyed his master's final order and tried again and again to destroy it, and failed. The magic was too deep, the protections layered like sediment over a grave, so the locket remained there, malignant and waiting, while the boy who had stolen it lay unnamed beneath a black lake. Time moved. The First War ended. Sirius went to Azkaban. Not Sirius, who had once mocked his brother's devotion, but the house itself became the next custodian of Regulus's plan. When the Order of the Phoenix reclaimed number 12, they walked through a mausoleum of old magic without understanding that one object in a cabinet held the echo of a dead Slytherin's rebellion. This is important. Nobody knew what they were cleaning around. Then the chain slipped. Mundungus Fletcher stole the locket, as he stole so many things, and sold it. Dolores Umbridge bought it, ignorant and pleased, and wore it like a medal over her heart. The dark mark on Regulus's arm had once burned with borrowed power. Now a bureaucrat paraded that same power as jewellery in the Ministry's fluorescent corridors. Without Regulus's first theft, there is no trinket for Mundungus to pilfer, no cursed necklace for Umbridge to preen beneath. The trio's hunt only intersects this story because that locket is in circulation, because it is no longer entombed in a cave only Voldemort and Kreacher could reach. Harry, Ron and Hermione infiltrate the Ministry and tear it from Umbridge's throat, and in doing so, they finally step directly into Regulus's unfinished work. The grave was empty, the task was not. Destroying the locket is not a simple act of spellwork, it is psychological siege. The Horcrux whispers, corrodes, magnifies every insecurity until Ron walks away and Harry nearly breaks under the weight of inherited expectations. When Ron returns and drives the sword of Gryffindor through the locket's heart, he is not only ending a fragment of Voldemort, he is paying the emotional price of Regulus's decision to make that destruction possible at all. Each shattered Horcrux strips Voldemort of his false immortality. By the time Harry walks into the forest and later faces him in the Great Hall, enough anchors have been broken that death is once again a real outcome, not a theoretical hope. Not Dumbledore, who had traced the pattern of Horcruxes with academic precision, could have arranged this exact chain. It required a frightened, resolute boy in a cave, a house elf's obedience, a thief's greed, a tyrant's vanity, and 3 teenagers' stubborn courage. Regulus never sees the end of the story. He never hears McGonagall's shouted orders, never feels the castle shake, never watches Molly Weasley stand between her daughter and a killer. But every spell cast in the Battle of Hogwarts is hurled in a world where Voldemort can finally die, partly because, years earlier, a teenage Death Eater looked into a basin of poison and said no. And somewhere beneath the lake, the water is very still. But the lake did not have to be still. The grave did not have to be full. In another telling of this story, the water breaks, a house elf screams, and a boy who meant to die instead claws his way back to the surface. Regulus Black does not escape unmarked. The potion has razored his throat, his magic shudders and misfires, his hands are shredded from inferi claws. This is important. He is alive, but only just, and Kreacher is dragging him to the shore with a strength born of terror and command. The replica locket lies heavy against his ribs, the real one clutched in his fist, and he knows now, with a clarity colder than the cave air, that his master has torn his own soul. The plan changes in that instant. He had come here to die cleanly, to let the lake close over a black air and a secret. Instead, coughing on grave cold water, he understands that a dead boy cannot finish what he has begun. A living traitor might. He orders Kreacher to take him home, then to Grimmauld Place, then, after a night of fever and visions of burning emerald light, he gives an order no Black has ever spoken aloud. Find Albus Dumbledore. Not Dumbledore, who had once watched Sirius storm from the Black household and had written the boy off as the family's only salvageable soul. not Dumbledore, who had marked Regulus down in neat impersonal handwriting as another pureblood lost to the Dark Lord. Yet now a Slytherin son, shaking and half-broken, asks to be brought before him in secret, with a cursed locket and a story about a cave full of the dead. Would Dumbledore believe him? The man who will one day trust Severus Snape on the strength of a single shattered confession listens instead to a different kind of remorse. Regulus does not speak of love for a murdered girl. He speaks of soul mutilation, of magic so obscene it makes even a black heir recoil. He speaks of a house elf used as disposable bait. His horror is not sentimental, it is almost theological. Voldemort has violated the very grammar of magic. Dumbledore sees the difference. Snape is a penitent who wants to atone for one death. Regulus is a strategist who wants to prevent uncountable deaths by dismantling an immortal. Two Slytherin spies, two dark marks, two very different anchors. One bound to Lily, who never knew him. One bound to a locket that should never have existed. In this alternate war, Regulus returns to the Serpent's Nest. He moves among Death Eaters as a living shadow, feeding Dumbledore names, safe houses, patterns of recruitment. He knows the Lestrange's habits, the Carrow's weaknesses, the way Lucius Malfoy flinches when the Dark Lord touches his arm too long. Each detail is another crack in the monolith of fear. And somewhere, Sirius Black rots in Azkaban, not knowing his little brother is alive and working for the man Sirius once followed. When they finally stand in the same room again, one gaunt from Dementors, one scarred from poison and lies, what happens to two brothers who chose different roads away from the same house? Does Sirius trust the Death Eater who turned, or does he see only the mark? The grave was empty. The family tapestry has not yet burned away his name. Dumbledore now has two Slytherins watching Voldemort from opposite angles. One in the staff room, one in the drawing room at Grimmauld Place, and the war bends around that secret geometry. In such a world, when Harry Potter walks into Hogwarts and hears the whispers about the first fall of Voldemort, does he also hear another name? Does he grow up with stories of Regulus Black, Dumbledore's hidden dagger, instead of piecing together the truth from a dusty note in a fake locket? And if he does, how different does the final battle become? In this reshaped war, something else has shifted too, something Regulus Black never hears and never needs to hear. Somewhere in the Department of Mysteries, in a cold circular room lined with dusty shelves, a glass sphere waits with a single sentence inside it that will reorder the world. Regulus dies without ever knowing it exists. This is important. The prophecy about the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord is not common currency, not a whispered legend traded in Nocturne Alley. It is a secret held so tightly that even those who move closest to its consequences walk in ignorance. Not Dumbledore, who had listened to Sybil Trelawney's fractured voice and pieced out a plan from 13 half-spoken words, would dream of entrusting that knowledge to a 16-year-old Death Eater with a famous surname and a dark mark burning on his arm. Regulus hears fragments, of course. Rumours of a child, of a night in Godric's Hollow when the killing curse rebounded and left only a ruined cottage and a grave that was empty of its intended future. He hears Voldemort's followers speak of destiny as if it were a curse word. But he never hears the full wording, never knows that the Dark Lord is obsessing over a baby boy while another boy, already marked and already damned, is quietly preparing the ground for that baby's victory. The irony is brutal. while Voldemort tears his soul apart to evade a fate he half understands. One of his own chosen, a black heir raised on pure blood scripture, is dismantling the immortality that prophecy requires him to have. The Dark Lord stares at the stars, hunting for the child named in the riddle. Regulus stares into a cave full of inferi and thinks only of what must not remain alive. This disconnect reveals the fractured architecture of knowledge in the war. No one sees the whole design. Not Dumbledore, who had theories about Horcruxes but no proof of the locket's theft. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the wreckage and never knew that another young man had already died to make that rescue matter. Not Sirius, who had loved his brother once and never learned that Regulus's final act aligned him, in the end, with the very people Sirius chose. Regulus chooses without guarantee. There is no chosen one in his mind, no comforting narrative that promises his sacrifice will succeed. He does not act because a prophecy names a savior. He acts because Kreacher's broken voice and the cold logic of Horcrux magic make it impossible to remain what he was. The plan he carves into reality is narrow, desperate, and utterly without reassurance. Here is the pattern Interrupt the Prophecy never mentions. It speaks Harry's name, but the path it sketches is paved by hands it does not acknowledge. The Hall of Prophecy does not hold a single orb with the words Regulus Black on its base. Yet without the nameless boy in the cave, without the stolen locket, and the note signed only R.A.B., the prophesied child would one day stand before a Dark Lord whose soul was still intact, and the story would end in a very different grave. Yet Regulus did not vanish entirely into that different grave. His choice survived in the most unlikely vessel, a house elf who had been forced to watch and remember. The grave was empty of recognition, of prophecy, of song, but Kreacher carried the story like a wound that would not close. For years, that wound festered into bitterness. At Grimmauld Place, Kreacher muttered his hatred, clung to the Black family's worst ideals, and sabotaged the very boy who would one day complete his master's work. Not Sirius, who had stormed from this house in fury, understood what lay beneath the elf's spite. Not Dumbledore, who had walked its halls with measured tread, perceived that the creature snarling in the corner was also a guardian of Voldemort's most dangerous secret. They saw a servant. They did not see a survivor. Harry only begins to see it when he holds the fake locket in his hand and reads the initials R.A.B., when the abstract name acquires a face, a room, a tapestry, a brother. This is important, because when he returns to Grimmauld Place in the thick of his own hunted year, he does something no one else has done. He asks Kreacher to tell the truth about the cave. He listens. He grieves. He treats Regulus's death not as a footnote, but as a sacrifice. The transformation begins in a kitchen. Harry places the real locket before Kreacher like a relic returned to its rightful altar. He speaks Regulus's name with respect. He entrusts Kreacher with a mission that echoes the old one: find Mundungus, recover what was stolen, bring back what matters. Short command. Long history. The elf who once obeyed a suicidal order in a cursed cavern now straightens, his voice losing its poisonous edge as he accepts a task that is dangerous but not cruel. The parallel is not subtle. In the cave, Kreacher had swallowed poison because Regulus asked and because his magic could not refuse. In London's alleys and shadowed markets, he now throws himself into Harry's service with the same ferocity but a different kind of compulsion. He is driven not only by enchantment but by recognition that this boy honors the Black heir who died defying the Dark Lord. The old loyalty does not vanish, it is redirected. By the time the war reaches Hogwarts, that redirection has become something astonishing. When Voldemort's forces breach the castle, Kreacher does not cower in the kitchens or cling to some ancient rule of civility. He rallies the house elves, seizes a kitchen knife, and charges into battle against Death Eaters who would never have considered such beings worth fearing. Steel from the scullery becomes a weapon. Obedience becomes open defiance. It is an echo of Regulus walking willingly into the cave, an attack from a place Voldemort never thought to guard. Kreacher's redemption cannot be separated from Regulus's. The elf is not simply reformed, he is allowed to complete a plan his master began and died for. When Harry treats the locket not as a trinket but as a grave marker for a boy without a tomb, when he accepts Kreacher's service without mockery, he forges a bridge between the betrayed Death Eater and the destined child. The grave was empty, but the legacy is alive. In Kreacher's dim, ancient eyes, Harry becomes more than the chosen one. He is the first wizard who truly understands what Regulus did, who sees that the note in the locket was not a boast but a confession. And once someone finally understands, what else might be brought out of the dark and into the light? So when Harry follows Kreacher back into that suffocating drawing room, when the last words of Regulus's confession are still echoing in his mind, the house itself offers a counter-argument. A carefully embroidered lie. This is important. The Black family tapestry dominates the wall like a grave that refused to stay still. Ancient thread, darkened by time and smoke, unfurls a single unbroken story of blood purity, gold and green, silver and black, the proud tree of a family that believed its own magic could never be diluted. Names spiral outward in delicate script, births and deaths stitched with obsessive care, as if ink were not permanent enough for what they thought they were. It is beautiful, and it is ruthless. Here the truth is not spoken, it is burned away. Sirius's name, once neatly sewn among his ancestors, has been scorched from the fabric, a ragged black hole where a child refused to follow the plan. The edges are charred, the threads melted into a hardened scar, as if the tapestry itself had flinched when Walburga's wand struck. Sirius, who openly defied their creed, is granted not even the mercy of a date. He is made to have never existed at all. And just inches away, Regulus Black remains untouched. The favoured son, the dutiful heir. His name curves gracefully in emerald thread, the gold line of his life ending in a small, precise notation, 1979. No commentary, no stain, no hint that he walked into a cave of Inferi and died tearing at the heart of Voldemort's immortality. In the family's official record, the Death Eater died as he lived. Loyal, pure, correct, the irony is almost unbearable. Sirius, who ran from darkness, is erased as a traitor. Regulus, who walked into darkness on purpose and betrayed Voldemort himself, is preserved as the obedient Black. The tapestry becomes a kind of enchanted replica of the family's preferred story. A charm-woven illusion that lets them keep their myth intact. Not Dumbledore, who had traced bloodlines and prophecies, had ever stood here and seen how thoroughly a wall could lie. For Harry, the revelation is surgical. He stands before the cloth after Kreacher's halting tale, and the names rearrange themselves in his mind. Regulus is no longer the neat inscription of a boy who died young. He is the unseen hand that placed the fake locket, the unseen voice that wrote the note Harry carried into the cave with Dumbledore. The grave was empty, but this wall insisted it was full. What else had he misunderstood? The tapestry pretends to record truth, but it really records obedience. It calls Sirius shame and Regulus honor, when the reality is precisely reversed. And if a single piece of cloth can invert a life so completely, if an heirloom can turn a traitor into a paragon and a savior into a stain, then what of the other records that wizards trust? What of school histories, ministry archives, even order legends? How many other Regulus Blacks are hidden between their threads, waiting for someone to notice that the embroidery does not match the blood? And yet, for all that embroidery and all those names, one contrast refuses to lie flat. Harry's war is crowded. His heroism is conducted beneath chandeliers and on castle battlements, in ministry atriums and school corridors lit by spellfire. There are witnesses, there are prophecies whispered and shouted, crowds gathered in the great hall, eyes fixed on a boy who never asked to be a symbol but is forced to live as one. His story is constructed in real time because the world is watching him stay alive. Regulus's war ends in a cave. No audience, no prophecy, no applause. Only a black lake, a poisoned basin, and a house elf bound by magic and by orders to tell no one what he has seen. The grave was empty, in a sense far crueler than any marble monument in the death chamber. There is not even a body for the Black family tapestry to mourn, only a scorched name and a mother's scream. This is important, because stories, even in a world built on magic, do not naturally bend toward the hidden. They gravitate toward the visible, the dramatic, the narratively convenient. A boy with a lightning scar who duels in front of a school is easy to remember. A young man who swaps a locket for a replica in the dark and is dragged wordlessly beneath a cursed lake is easy to forget. Not Dumbledore, who had walked that same stone path with Harry, ever speaks of Regulus's footsteps beside his own, separated by years but aligned in purpose. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins at Godric's Hollow before a crowd of onlookers, ever carries the story of the black son who chose to die alone. Not Sirius, who had escaped Azkaban with his brother's initials etched unknowingly into his future, ever learns that the traitor in the family was also its last defender. The post-war narrative hardens. Statues are raised, names are carved. Harry's courage, Hermione's intelligence, Ron's loyalty, the sacrifice of Remus and Tonks and Fred, these become the pillars of the official story. But there is no order meeting where Kreacher stands in the center and recites in a shaking voice the truth of the cave. There is no Wizengamot inquiry into the fate of Regulus Black. There is, instead, silence, and if Regulus can vanish so completely, what of the others? What of the nameless witches who smuggled Muggle-born children over borders, the minor ministry clerks who misfiled warrants, the shopkeepers who hid wands beneath floorboards and never told a soul? How many small, unrecorded choices chipped away at Voldemort's power long before Harry raised his wand? The pattern interrupts the legend. Heroism, it seems, may not require a crowd. It may not require a grave, or a song, or even a surviving witness. Regulus's story presses against the glass of the larger war and asks a quiet, unsettling question. Is an act less heroic because no one sees it? Or is the truest form of courage precisely the kind that walks into the dark with no expectation of ever being remembered? Regulus Black's heroism begins, paradoxically, at the moment he surrenders. At 16, when the dark mark burns its way into his forearm, he believes he is stepping into his inheritance, not his undoing. The grave was empty where his childhood might have been. In its place stood a family crest, a tapestry, and a lord who promised that purebloods would never again need to bow. The mark is a charm and a chain. It ties his magic to Voldemort's will, but it also gives shape to every story he has ever been told. That Muggle-borns dilute, that weakness contaminates, that power is protection. This is important. To understand his betrayal, one must first understand that for a time, the serpent and skull on his skin feel like a blessing. Wilburger's eyes shine. The house elves tremble in what he mistakes for reverence. Regulus thinks he is finally fully alive. Then the work begins. Raids that are called cleansings, duels that are called lessons. The first time he stands in a ruined sitting room and sees a child's toy half buried in ash, something small and frightened moves in him, but he buries it under the weight of ideology. Not Dumbledore, who had spoken of choices over blood, is in his ear now, but Bellatrix, but Rodolphus, but the echo of his mother's praise. He tells himself this is necessary. He tells himself he knew what he was doing. He does not. Not yet. Kreacher's ordeal redraws the map. Voldemort sends a house elf to the cave because house elf magic is old and strange, because their suffering does not matter to him, because if the elf dies, nothing of value is lost. Regulus listens as Kreacher, shivering and hoarse, describes the boat that moves only for blood, the potion that burns the mind, the inferi that clutch and grasp in the black water like a living grave. He hears that Voldemort left Kreacher to die. He hears that the locket was not merely protected but worshipped, as if the Dark Lord had placed part of himself inside a trinket. Cognitive dissonance is not loud. It is a hairline crack. Voldemort claims to be the guardian of pure blood supremacy, yet he treats a black family elf as disposable, a pure blood heir as expendable muscle, life itself as a cheap, endlessly replaceable replica. What does it mean to serve a master who despises all who serve him? What kind of plan is that for a future in which anyone can feel safe? Admitting the answer is the hardest magic Regulus ever performs. It requires more courage than any duel, because it is a duel with his own reflection, with the boy who took the mark, with the son who craved his mother's approval, with the Slytherin who believed power and righteousness were the same thing. To betray Voldemort, he must first betray the version of himself that thought Voldemort was the truth. Lily was a charms prodigy, but Regulus's great, terrible gift is moral revision. He looks at the dark mark and, for the first time, sees not honor but indictment. The line he crossed at 16 cannot be erased. It can only be answered. And the answer, he realizes, will demand that he cross another line entirely, not away from darkness as Sirius did, but straight through it, into a cave of his own choosing, with no expectation of rescue and no certainty that even this final act will ever be known. He is not the only one who walks into death without a map. Years earlier, in a different cottage, another young person had already stepped between Voldemort and the future. The grave was empty of the woman who truly began Harry's protection. Lily Evans Potter, standing in that nursery, does something almost brutally simple. She refuses to move. She places her body, her will, her love between the Dark Lord and her child. No wand raised, no counter-curse, only a choice. The killing curse falls, and ancient magic, older than any written charm, answers a question Voldemort never meant to ask. This is important. Lily does not know it will work. She has no text, no prophecy, no tidy theory in a notebook. She only has a mother's decision and a split second in which to make it. The protection that blossoms from her death is not a calculated plan. It is a miracle born from intention so absolute that the universe itself seems to bend. Harry's skin remembers it. His blood remembers it. For years, her love is a living shield around a boy who thinks he is an orphan. Regulus Black's act is colder, more deliberate, but no less desperate. Where Lily steps between Voldemort and her son, Regulus steps between Voldemort and his own immortality. He hears Kreacher's broken account of the cave, of the burning potion, of the locket that is not merely an heirloom but a wound in the fabric of life itself. He understands enough to know this. If these objects endure, Voldemort cannot truly die. So he walks into the same darkness Harry and Dumbledore will one day face and tears one brick from the fortress long before the boy who lived is old enough to lift a wand against its builder. Lily was a charms prodigy, but even she could not have designed what her death became. Regulus, raised on pure blood doctrine and cold strategy, tries to design his. He writes a note. He brings a replica locket. He constructs a fragile, secret rebellion in a single night, yet he too moves without certainty. He does not know if anyone will ever read his message, ever find the real locket, ever finish what he begins. He dies not with confirmation, but with a question. The narrative gives Lily the light. Her story is the emotional core, the visible sacrifice everyone reveres. Not Dumbledore, who had studied death for a lifetime. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins. Not Sirius, who had lost everything in one Halloween night. Ever speak of Regulus as anything but a name on a tapestry. His choice is buried in a cave, and in a house elf's grief. Yet without that hidden hand removing one Horcrux from the board, the boy under Lily's protection would grow up to face an enemy who could not be killed at all. So if Lily's love shields Harry's body, does Regulus's defiance in its own grim way shield Harry's future? And what else in this story is quietly holding the Dark Lord's death in place, unseen, until the very end? Regulus's stolen locket did not stay in the cave. Its poison travelled. Years later, it would hang from Harry's neck like a small, suffocating grave that he carried over his heart. The locket's magic was not loud. It did not fling curses or scream. It whispered. It thickened the air between three exhausted teenagers until every unspoken fear became a weight, every passing irritation hardened into accusation. When Harry wore it, his thoughts spiraled inward, circling the truth that had always terrified him most, that he was a weapon, not a boy, that Dumbledore had raised him for slaughter. Ron's envy, long buried under jokes and loyalty, rose like smoke in a closed room. Hermione's logic frayed into helplessness, her carefully constructed plans dissolving into the conviction that they were lost, alone, and already defeated. This is important. The locket did not invent these shadows. It merely illuminated them with cruel precision, the way the cave's green light had once illuminated Regulus's decision. To carry that object was to submit to a constant interrogation of the soul. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you say to your friends in the privacy of your own mind? Each rotation of the locket among the trio became a test of character, a quiet trial they barely understood they were taking. Regulus had taken a different version of that trial alone. He had no tent, no friends, no Hermione tracing maps in the dirt. Only Kreacher's broken account of the cave, the taste of betrayal when he understood that Voldemort saw even a house elf as disposable, and the knowledge that the locket was more than a trinket. In that moment, he knew that to remove it from Voldemort's control was to step outside the script written for a perfect black heir. The grave was empty for him long before the Inferi dragged him under. He had already buried his future the night he chose defiance. Years later, Ron Weasley would stand in a different chamber, dripping from the icy pool where he had retrieved the same locket for Harry. The Horcrux opened, and its defense was not fire or water, but vision, Harry and Hermione entwined. Voices of contempt, every insecurity Ron had ever nursed given shape and sound. Not Sirius, who had faced Azkaban's despair. Not Hagrid, who had carried baby Harry from ruins. It was Ron, ordinary Ron, who raised the sword and cut through the nightmare. In doing so, he answered Regulus's earlier courage with his own. The locket became a conduit between two generations of resistance, binding a Slytherin heir who died in secrecy to a Gryffindor boy who almost walked away. Lily was a charms prodigy, yet even her protection could not spare Harry from this more intimate corrosion. The same object that had dragged Regulus to his death now dragged Harry and Ron to the brink of betrayal, pulling them toward a different kind of drowning. But this time, someone came back up. And that single, staggering difference begins to rewrite the end of Voldemort's story. The grave was empty in another way as well, not of bodies this time, but of knowledge. Regulus's drowned revelation lay at the bottom of that black lake, while far away, a different mind tried to map the darkness with fewer stars. Dumbledore's path to the truth was slow, almost painfully so. A diary in the Chamber of Secrets, ink that thought, a memory that could possess a girl. One fragment. Then the ring in the ruins of the gaunt shack, its curse coiled around his hand like a delayed death sentence. 2 fragments. From there, he walked backward through Tom Riddle's life, through trophies and disappearances, through a boy who collected objects as if they were steps toward godhood. Only then did the pattern harden into certainty, not one Horcrux, not 2, but many. This is important. He did not begin the final hunt until his own grave was already waiting for him atop the astronomy tower. But imagine another line of time, only slightly bent. Regulus does not misjudge the potion. Kreacher pulls him from the water before the Inferi close their hands. The locket comes back to Grimmauld Place not as a curse that will gnaw on Harry's chest years later, but as evidence, proof, a physical confession of what Voldemort had done to his soul. In that line, a frightened, feverish 19-year-old stands in Dumbledore's office with a house elf at his side and a shaking hand on a heavy chain. He tells the story of the cave, of the goblet that refilled itself, of the way the magic felt wrong, like a grave pretending to be a lake. He repeats the words Horcrux and soul and forever. Kreacher confirms every detail. The replica locket with its RAB note is never needed, because the original hangs between them, cold and very much alive. Years before Harry's first year, Dumbledore would have something he never truly had in canon, early confirmation. Not a theory, not a suspicion, but a map with one point inked in. How would that change the plan? He could have begun the Horcrux hunt while Voldemort was still bodiless, while the war was a whisper rather than a scream. He might have sent trusted Order members after the cup, the diadem, the snake, instead of waiting until he and Harry were almost out of time. Snape's role might have shifted as well. Not Dumbledore, who had bound Severus to protect a boy he barely knew, but Dumbledore, who could have bound him to a specific task: dismantle the anchors of the Dark Lord you once worshipped. Harry's childhood might still have been hard, but his 6th year would not have been a desperate crash course in death and destiny. The conversation on the astronomy tower could have been a debriefing, not a farewell. Yet that is the tragedy of war. Information dies in silos. Regulus's knowledge drowned with him. Dumbledore's deductions burned away with the ring's curse and with his fall. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the rubble, knew. Not Sirius, who had rotted in Azkaban, knew. Harry was left with fragments. A locket in a house, a note, a memory in a cave. A story half told. Regulus's path reminds us that even the greatest strategist can only move the pieces he can see, while other crucial moves play out in locked rooms, in underground lakes, in houses whose curtains are always drawn. The next question is simple and terrible. What happens when those hidden moves finally collide? When those hidden moves finally collide. It does not happen in a battlefield or a courtroom. It happens in a house Harry once hated, in a drawing room that smells of dust and old magic. Years later, long after the war, he walks back into number 12, Grimmauld Place, not as a fugitive boy, but as a man who has outlived too many ghosts. The tapestry is still there. The great black family tree, scorched and mended, its threads recording a history of pride and erasure. Sirius's name is a burned hole, Regulus's is not. Harry stands before that stitched Regulus Arcturus Black and understands with a clarity he never had at 17 that this quiet name on ancient fabric once carried a plan that cut straight into Voldemort's immortality. This is important. Around him, the room has changed. The locket is gone. The heavy, suffocating presence that once pressed on his chest is only a memory. The places where Horcruxes lay hidden are empty now, simple shelves and cracked cabinets. The grave was empty, he thinks, but not the house. This place was a reliquary of choices, of replicas and real sacrifices, of stories nobody told him in time. He reads the note again. He has kept it, flattened and repaired, the ink slightly faded. To the Dark Lord, I have stolen the real Horcrux at 16 that had been a riddle, a clue in a hunt. As an adult, it is a voice. A boy's voice, really. Regulus was not much older than Harry had been when he followed Dumbledore into the cave. Harry can feel the cold on his skin again, taste the salt of the underground lake, remember the way inferi hands closed around his ankles. Regulus walked into that same water alone. No phoenix, no headmaster, no wand raised beside his to split the darkness. Not Dumbledore, who had explained Horcruxes with clinical distance. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins. Not Sirius, who had cursed this house and its blood. Only a Slytherin boy and a house elf, bound by a command and a promise. Harry imagines telling this story to his children. Not just about the lightning scar and the final duel, but about the boy whose name sits on the same tapestry as Bellatrix and Narcissa and yet chose a different end. He will say that their peaceful world rests on many graves, and some of those graves have no markers, no statues, no chocolate frog cards. He will say that Kreacher knew the truth long before anyone else did. Understanding Regulus complicates everything. Slytherin is no longer a simple emblem of cruelty, it is also the house that produced a boy who learned the cost of blind loyalty and paid it back in blood. Death Eater is no longer a single shape in Harry's mind, but a fractured set of stories. Some who killed for pleasure, some who fled, one who drowned in a cave so that one locket would one day lie on this floor. If you were Harry, standing in that room with the empty spaces where horrors once rested, what would you feel? Anger that Regulus Black was never honored, never given a grave with his true story carved in stone, or a fierce, unsettling gratitude that even forgotten, he still helped you win? Anger and gratitude. Both are justified. But they lead to a deeper interruption, a more unsettling correction of the story everyone thinks they know about this war. Because when people speak of Voldemort's defeat, the roll call is almost liturgical. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, who walked into the forest and came back. Hermione Granger, whose mind mapped every trap and every charm. Ron Weasley, who left and returned and destroyed a locket that whispered every insecurity he had ever tried to bury. Albus Dumbledore, architect of the long plan, who arranged pieces on a board of graves and prophecies. Not Dumbledore, who had once stood in a cave and drunk poison beside a boy he was grooming for martyrdom. Not Hagrid, who had carried that boy's body in his arms and wept as if the world itself were ending. Not Sirius, who had fallen through a veil before he could ever tell his brother's full truth. The Weasleys. The Order of the Phoenix. Snape, who killed a man to save his mission and died without clearing his own name. These are the constellations most people can name in the dark, and then, without warning, the pattern should break. Regulus Black, a Death Eater who removed a Horcrux from Voldemort's armor years before Harry knew what the word meant. This is important. Structurally, the locket lying ruined in the Room of Requirement is as decisive as any Elder Wand allegiance, any final Expelliarmus cast on a blood-soaked floor. Without that earlier theft, Harry's later victory is incomplete, the grave of Voldemort's soul not yet fully dug. Imagine then a memorial that acknowledges this. Not the simple white tombs and school plaques, but a long stone wall in a quiet courtyard of the Ministry, carved with names that do not fit neatly into house or faction. James and Lily, Moody and Tonks, Fred Weasley, and then, in the same careful script, Regulus Black, traitor to the Dark Lord, who died in a cave so that a locket could one day be destroyed by hands that never knew his face. The grave was empty, but the wall would not be. In that imagined space, there would be others like him. Unsung saboteurs, spies whose families thought they died as villains. It would force every witch and wizard who walked past to ask a different question. Who else did we misjudge? Fan communities, in their own way, have already begun building that invisible wall. In fanfiction, Regulus is pulled out of the shadows, given voice, given a room in Grimmauld Place that is not just a shrine to a lost son, but a war room where he studies Horcruxes and maps his solitary rebellion. In essays and analysis, readers trace how his stolen locket becomes a hinge on which the entire narrative turns. In art, he stands shoulder to shoulder with Harry and Sirius, no longer a footnote, but a figure. Canon does not hang his portrait in the headmaster's office. There is no moving replica of Regulus offering grave advice to future children. But we are not bound by the ministry's records or Hogwarts walls. We can choose, consciously, to place his story in our own mental gallery of heroes, to let his name interrupt the familiar litany every time we tell ourselves how the Dark Lord fell. Regulus Black's life is a straight line that keeps bending back on itself until it snaps. Obedient son, teenage fanatic, silent traitor in a cave full of the dead. This is important. He begins where Sirius refuses to stay, in the House of Black, beneath the ancestral tapestry that tells a single suffocating story about blood and worth. Regulus believes it. He is the good heir, the quiet one who listens when his parents speak of purity and power, who lets their definition of good settle over him like a well-tailored cloak. At Hogwarts, Slytherin welcomes him without a ripple. The grave of his childhood self is dug early under green and silver banners. So when Voldemort rises, the progression feels natural. A 16-year-old who has been told all his life that he is special, that his blood is a kind of magic, does not see a monster when the Dark Lord offers him a mark. He sees confirmation. He sees a future. He swears himself to a master who mirrors everything his family ever praised, and for a time he is proud. Not Sirius, who had fled that house in open rebellion. Regulus stays, Regulus serves. The fracture comes not from ideology, but from a house elf. Kreacher returns from the Horcrux cave broken, his mind full of green potion and drowning hands, his body shaking with remembered cold. Regulus listens. He hears how Voldemort used Kreacher as a disposable instrument, how the Inferi dragged at him, how the Dark Lord never intended the elf to come back alive. In that moment, the polished narrative of noble sacrifice and pure blood destiny meets a different truth. His master does not care if loyal servants die screaming in the dark. From there, his life becomes a secret corridor. He studies what Kreacher saw, understands enough about Horcruxes to grasp that Voldemort has torn his soul, and he makes a plan that no one will witness. He will go back. He will steal the locket. He will leave a replica and a note, a single line of defiance signed R.A.B., and he will not come out again. There is no order meeting, no shared vow, no prophecy. Only a boy and his elf, a cave, a goblet, a lake of corpses. The central tragedy is not merely that he dies. It is that he dies expecting oblivion. He walks into the cave knowing his family will mourn a loyal Death Eater, not a saboteur. He knows the Dark Lord will never understand which servant betrayed him. He does not know if the locket will ever be found, if his sacrifice will matter, if anyone will be alive years later to read the shaking script he leaves behind. The grave was empty of witnesses. That is the point. His redemption is entirely internal. No public absolution, no headmaster's speech, no final reconciliation with Sirius. Not Dumbledore, who had traced so many patterns in this war, sees this one. Not Hagrid, who had carried other boys from other ruins, carries Regulus from the water. He chooses, he drinks, he drowns, and the only creature who knows the full story is bound by magic and devotion to keep serving the house that killed its own child. What does that leave us with, if not an uncomfortable question? In a life measured in secrets, where every system, from family to school to Dark Lord, has taught him the wrong definition of virtue, what does it mean that Regulus still finds a way to act for the right thing? He is not granted a new ideology, only a glimpse of horror and a refusal to accept it. He must walk deeper into darkness before he can even see the outline of a way out. And so Regulus Black's life becomes less an answer than a challenge. If goodness can exist in a boy trained to be cruel, if heroism can unfold in a room with no audience, then the comfortable categories of light and dark begin to blur. His story stands in the shadows of the larger war and asks, quietly but insistently, when everything you have been taught is wrong, and no one will ever know you chose differently, what does it mean to be good? Regulus's answer is not theoretical. It is carved into a cave wall where no one saw him die. It is written in a note that was never meant to be famous. The grave was empty, for him, long before the Inferi dragged him under. He had already buried the boy his parents raised, the perfect Slytherin son, the quiet mirror image of Sirius who stayed, who obeyed, who let pure blood doctrine wrap around him like a charm gone wrong. This is important, because his story proves that being formed inside a harmful system does not make resistance impossible. It only makes it late and costly and unbearably lonely. He had been the child who listened when Walburga raged about blood traitors. He had watched Sirius burned from the family tapestry and stayed in his chair. He took the dark mark as a teenager, not because he was a monster, but because the world he knew told him it was loyalty, destiny, survival. Regulus was not born a traitor to Voldemort. He became one. The turning point is not grand. It is a house elf returning home, shaking, soaked with potion and lake water, whispering about a locket and a cave and a master who ordered him to die. In that moment, the ideology of the House of Black collides with something older and quieter, the knowledge that a life you own is still a life. When Regulus hears what Voldemort did to Kreacher, the grave inside him opens. Something is buried, something else wakes up. Betrayal in that light becomes a different kind of magic. It is not treachery for its own sake, not a hunger for power, but an act of moral courage, the decision to turn against your own community when it demands you accept the unacceptable. Not Dumbledore, who had recruited students into the Order. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins. Not Sirius, who had run from Grimmauld Place and never looked back. Regulus alone looks at the dark mark on his arm and chooses to make it a lie. His rebellion is small and invisible. A stolen locket, a replica left in its place, a note signed only with initials, and the promise that he will be the one to destroy what he has taken. No prophecy names him, no phoenix sings for him. Yet that hidden act becomes a fracture line in Voldemort's immortality, a structural weakness Harry will later step into without ever knowing whose footsteps he is following. This is important, because it reframes what redemption can look like. Regulus does not live long enough to atone in public. He does not switch sides in the Great Hall, wand raised, seeking applause. He is deeply complicit, and then he chooses a different ending anyway. His courage is measured not in how many people see it, but in how certain he is that no one ever will. If a boy trained to worship the Dark Lord can rewrite his own fate with nothing but a house elf, a locket, and a plan no one will remember, what does that suggest about the choices available to us? In wars where the monsters do not wear masks and the magic is harder to name. So now, imagine the war in reverse. The story you know, rewound frame by frame, but with a second figure always just outside the light. Regulus Black, already dead, already gone, and yet terribly, insistently alive in the background of every scene. Harry in the cupboard under the stairs, the spider on the ceiling, The birthday no one remembers. While he counts the days in that narrow grave of a room, a stolen Horcrux rests 2 floors up at number 12, Grimmauld Place, wrapped in dust and old magic, humming quietly behind the walls of a house that hates him on sight. This is important. The locket is there before he ever knows wizards exist. It is there while he is still only a boy who dreams of being rescued by parents who are, as far as he knows, nothing but names on a grave. The first trip to Diagon Alley, owls and cauldrons, and the impossible brightness of a world that has been waiting for him. Not Hagrid, who had broken down the door and told him he was a wizard, knew that another boy had once walked into this world certain he was serving its future, not plotting its undoing. In a townhouse hidden by a black family charm, a different plan has already been written in a cramped, determined hand and left at the bottom of a lake of Inferi. The Sorting Hat touches Harry's head and whispers Slytherin as a possibility. He begs for Gryffindor. Far away, his name is being muttered in another common room as a cautionary tale. Regulus Black, the perfect Slytherin, the ideal heir, the one who died young in the Dark Lord's service. No one there knows that the grave was empty of loyalty long before his body vanished beneath that black water. The Chamber of Secrets opens. A basilisk moves through the pipes. Children are petrified. Harry faces Tom Riddle's replica in the form of a diary, never suspecting that another piece of that same fractured soul is hanging, inert and malignant, in his godfather's childhood home. Not Sirius, who had slammed doors and cursed his family's name, knew that his brother's locket lay in the same house where he brooded, a silent, poisonous echo of a sacrifice he had never understood. The Order meets in Grimmauld Place. They pass the locket on the mantelpiece, they shove it into a sack during the great cleaning, they feel its weight and its resistance and dismiss it as one more cursed heirloom. Every room is thick with Regulus's legacy, the tapestry scorched where Sirius burned himself away, the bedroom where Regulus once traced the dark mark on his own arm, the cupboard where Kreacher hides and whispers the truth into the dark. No one listens. Years later, Dumbledore and Harry stand on the edge of the underground lake. The green potion waits. The Inferi sleep. They believe they are walking into mystery. In truth, they are stepping into Regulus's footprints, following the path of a boy who came here alone with a house elf and a fake locket, who drank and screamed and ordered Kreacher to leave him. Harry forces the potion down Dumbledore's throat. Kreacher once watched Regulus choke on the same despair. The scene does not change. Its depth does. This is the alternate lens that does not alter canon, but saturates it. The events remain. The meaning darkens. A second war runs parallel beneath the first, fought by a boy whose name becomes 3 initials on a scrap of parchment. Pattern interrupt. Do not think of this as a sequence of scenes. Think of it as a tapestry. The Triwizard Tournament, the Graveyard, the Department of Mysteries, the Battle of Hogwarts, all woven in rich, familiar colour. And in one corner, almost out of sight, a single thread labelled R.A.B., thin and easily missed, nonetheless holding an entire section of the pattern together, keeping the whole from tearing when the final pull comes. If you remember one thing about Regulus Black, let it be this: he was not a footnote, not a set of initials on a scrap of parchment, not a name etched into a family tapestry and then burned away. He was a boy who stood in the very heart of the magic he had been raised to worship and, for one clear, impossible moment, chose to say no. This is important. because the war against Voldemort is often told as a story of singular figures and singular moments, of chosen ones and headmasters and prophecies that seem to bend the world around them. But the locket in that cave was not moved by a prophecy. The replica he left behind did not glow with destiny. It was placed there by a 17-year-old who knew, with terrible lucidity, that no one was coming to save him and that he would not be remembered for what he was about to do. Regulus had no mentor guiding his hand in that cavern. Not Dumbledore, who had theories and maps and a head full of ancient lore. Not Hagrid, who had carried another boy from another ruin. Not Sirius, who had already run from Grimmauld Place and from the suffocating gravity of the Black name. Regulus walked into the cave with a house elf and a plan that ended at his own grave, and still he went forward. He had been the perfect son, the obedient heir, the Slytherin who did what was expected. He took the dark mark not as a rebellion but as fulfillment, as if the ink was simply the final line in a script written long before he was born. And yet, when Kreacher returned broken and shivering, when the truth of the Horcrux and the Inferi and Voldemort's contempt for all life stood in front of him like a mirror, he chose to shatter the script instead of himself. The grave was empty because there was never a body brought home, never a funeral, never a public moment in which his choice could be named as courage. His parents mourned a lost heir, not a lost traitor to Voldemort. The Order never toasted him. Harry never heard his name in a roll call of the fallen. And still, when Harry later sailed into that same black water with Dumbledore at his side, the path had already been cut by a boy no one had thought to look for. If you remember one thing, remember that Voldemort was not defeated only by Harry's wand or Lily's sacrificial charm. He was also defeated by a Slytherin teenager who had been indoctrinated, compromised, afraid, and still capable of one decisive act of defiance that no one would ever see. So when you think about who truly brought Voldemort down, carry Regulus's name beside Harry's, beside Lily's, beside the ones whose graves are marked and honored, and then turn the question inward, knowing what you now know about the boy behind the initials RAB. How does it change the way you read these scenes, the way you watch this war unfold, the way you decide who the real heroes of this story are? So now the question turns, slowly, deliberately, back to the listener. When you look at the fall of Voldemort, whose sacrifice do you believe cut deepest into his power? Regulus in the cave, stealing the locket and sealing his own grave. Snape on the astronomy tower, killing Dumbledore with a spell that shattered Harry's faith and the Order's hope. Or someone else entirely, moving in the margins where the story barely lingers. This is important. Because each of these choices did more than spill blood, they rewrote the very architecture of the war. Regulus's hand closing around the Horcrux, Snape's wand rising against the only wizard Voldemort truly feared, Harry walking into the forest with his mother's protection burning in his veins. These are not equal pains, but they are equally precise cuts into the Dark Lord's illusions of immortality. You are invited to choose, but not lightly. If you name Regulus, defend him with the image of Kreacher forced to drink the potion twice, with the ink on that note signed R.A.B., and left as a curse of truth inside a fake locket. If you choose Snape, point to the years of poisoned double life, to the moment he gives Harry the memories that finally unveil the plan Dumbledore built on his remorse. If you choose Lily, remember that Lily was a charms prodigy, that her refusal to step aside forged a protection even Voldemort's ancient magic could not fully comprehend. Do not answer only with feeling. Answer with scenes, with lines, with the exact instant in book or film when you knew this was the betrayal that truly wounded him. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated half a lifetime of quiet resistance, not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins, not Sirius, who had broken from his family's creed. You, your reading of the war, your verdict on whose courage altered the end. And then widen the circle. Is Regulus's act, in your view, overrated, too little, too late, a single stolen Horcrux in a sea of 7? Or are there other, quieter figures whose names should be spoken beside his? Mundungus, whose cowardly theft of the locket accidentally preserved it. Slughorn, whose buried memory of the Horcrux conversation gave Dumbledore the missing piece. Kreacher, whose grief and stubborn loyalty carried Regulus's story and the locket itself into Harry's hands. The grave was empty for more than one kind of hero. This is not a contest of suffering. It is an anatomy of courage, of betrayal, of the strange. Interlocking choices required to end a reign built on fear and fragments of soul. Leave your verdict and your evidence below, because the most haunting answers may shape where this story goes next. If enough of you can show, with precision and imagination, that Regulus's survival would have changed everything, then we will return to this grave and ask a darker question. What if Regulus Black had lived and walked back out of that cave alive? So we return one last time to the cave. The Black Lake is still. The stone basin stands empty. The echo of a scream that no one heard hangs over the water like a lingering charm, and somewhere beneath that surface the Inferi drift guarding a locket that is no longer there. The grave was empty. This is important, because the true relic of that night is not a piece of cursed metal, but the absence where Regulus once stood. The replica locket lies years away, in a different story, clutched in another hand. The real locket will find its way to a house elf's cupboard, to a boy's desperate hunt, to the breaking point of Voldemort's magic. But the cave remembers only this: a young man who walked in alive with a plan and did not walk out again. Not Dumbledore, who had charted so many of Voldemort's secrets, could feel that missing heartbeat in the stone. Not Hagrid, who had carried other children from other dark places, could sense the quiet grave under the lake. You have walked that path with him tonight, step by deliberate step, through a long, dark descent into a side character's life. You have watched a perfect son become a Death Eater, and a Death Eater become a traitor, and a traitor become something rarer. A boy who chose to die alone so that someone else someday might have a chance to live. Sitting with that kind of choice is not easy. The weight of it lingers. It should. If you felt that weight, if this story has shifted the way you see the war, then let that be your signal. Mark it. Preserve it. Like the note Regulus left in the basin, your response becomes part of the record. Like the video. Leave your own evidence in the comments. Share this with someone who thought Regulus was a footnote and nothing more. This is important because every time we return to these overlooked graves, the map of the conflict changes. And if you want more of this, more deep dive, alternate angle explorations of the quiet fractures that redirected the Wizarding War, there is already another thread waiting. Follow the question we have opened here. What if Regulus Black had survived the cave and come back out of that water alive? How would the plan to end Voldemort warp around a living RAB, moving in the shadows while Harry still believed the locket was only a puzzle? Or, if your attention has settled on the house elf who never forgot, step into the companion piece that traces Kreacher's full arc, from the moment he first drank from the basin to the instant he charges into battle at Hogwarts. Tonight began with a question. Who was the Death Eater who betrayed Voldemort? We end with a truth. His name was Regulus Black, and the war could not have ended the same way without him. The cave is silent now. The basin is empty. But the absence he left behind is still changing everything. Subscribe so you do not miss where that absence leads next.